Lorraine Cox was a 32-year-old woman living in Exeter, UK. She is dating a man named Ellie who lives in Scotland. Although the distance between them is quite long, they have gotten used to it. At first, they only met on weekends and talked, but gradually their feelings for each other grew deeper. By 2020, they had been in contact in this way for 2 years. Despite the challenges of the distance, they decided to get engaged. Now, they are building a future together and preparing for their wedding. Lorraine is also planning to have their first child. However, in early 2020, their plans had to change for several reasons. By February, Lorraine had moved to Scotland to be with Ellie, where she obtained a temporary visa, and they spent considerable time together. When summer arrived, she wanted to return to Exeter to visit her family and friends for a month or two. This trip was not a breakup, she simply missed her loved ones. Afterward, she intended to return to Scotland and continue strengthening their relationship. Although restrictions in the UK remained strict, they were gradually relaxing, allowing public events to resume and many establishments to reopen. People eagerly took to the streets to socialize again, and Lorraine was no exception. On September 1, 2020, she arrived at her father's house in Exeter, excited to reconnect with friends. They spent the evening visiting several bars, enjoying drinks and good company, until they realized it was time to go home. Everyone left in a good mood. On September 2nd, Lorraine posted an unusual message on social media, claiming she was going to leave the country. This surprised everyone, as her only previous move had been to Scotland, and she had no plans to relocate again. She had just arrived to visit her father and intended to stay for at least a month. This sudden change in her mood and plans seemed out of character. In her post, Lorraine mentioned wanting to move about 50 kilometers from her father's house to a place called Plymouth, which she described as the first stop on her planned journey. This behavior was shocking because Lorraine was not known for making impulsive decisions, especially on such a significant scale. She had a stable life and a loving relationship in Scotland and had never mentioned wanting to move elsewhere. Now, she was considering a move toward France. Unsurprisingly, this post had a deep impact on Ellie. They had a strong relationship, making his fear of losing her understandable. Lorraine's friends bombarded her with questions. Initially, she responded willingly, but as the conversation progressed, her tone changed and mistrust grew. Those who knew her well noticed shifts in her writing style. She began using unfamiliar emojis, making odd mistakes, and her messages conveyed a sense of hostility. This worried her loved ones, as she had always maintained positive relationships with them, and there was no reason for her to display such aggression or undergo drastic life changes. Her father, Tony, who was hosting her during this time, even showed a family friend her old messages alongside the new ones. He pointed out clear inconsistencies in her writing style. Even those who didn't know her well noticed something was off. Throughout this time, Lorraine's boyfriend, who was named Ellie, was especially concerned and tried to understand her behavior. Initially, she responded to him with short, cold replies, but eventually, her answers became even more abrupt. The conversation ended when Lorraine sent him an emoji of a middle finger. This intensified the suspicion that someone else was using her account. Ellie had known Lorraine for 2 years, so the idea that the trip was related to a breakup or conflict seemed unlikely. They valued each other, which made her odd responses even more perplexing. Unfortunately, because of the distance, her boyfriend felt helpless and unable to intervene. A situation arose concerning Tony, Lorraine's father. Determined to discover the truth, he faced a challenge because he was away at the time and couldn't check his daughter's room for clues. Instead, he began speaking to Lorraine's friends, particularly those who had been with her the day before her sudden move to Plymouth. He was scheduled to return home the next day. Upon arriving home, Tony's first action was to go to Lorraine's room, where his suspicions grew stronger. He had already spoken with her close friends, and they all confirmed that no one had seen Lorraine since their breakup at the bar when everyone had left for the night. Inside Lorraine's room, it appeared as though she had never returned after her outing with friends. Her belongings from Scotland remained untouched, and nothing was missing from her room. It looked as if she had left for an extended trip without taking any of her things, which seemed impossible. The most alarming discovery was the bag she had left behind. Lorraine had diabetes and always carried a first aid kit to monitor her blood sugar levels. Her health depended on these supplies, and she never went anywhere, even for a quick trip to the store, without them. For outings like the one to the bar, she typically used a smaller bag. The fact that her larger kit was still in her room raised serious concerns about her recent plans. Tony realized that his daughter had not returned from the party, leading him to fear that something might have happened to her health. The messages she had exchanged with friends and relatives also seemed troubling. Worried, Tony sent another message to Lorraine on social media, expressing concern for her health and asking if she was okay. He warned her that if she did not respond, he would have to contact the police. The message was seen, but he received no reply. After that, Tony's and Lorraine's friends could no longer tolerate the uncertainty and began their search. They started by looking for clues in the bar where they had spent the evening on September 2nd. They interviewed witnesses, distributed flyers, and retraced the presumed route Lorraine would have taken home. It was clear that something alarming must have happened during her journey since she never came home again. Law enforcement and journalists quickly became involved. They were skeptical of the theory that Lorraine might have suffered a health crisis. Detectives believed that if that were the case, she would not have been able to send messages to her friends. Furthermore, several days had passed since her disappearance, and she would likely have been found in a hospital, but tests of recent admissions yielded no results. It appeared far more likely that Lorraine had encountered danger from someone. Journalists rushed to report on the situation, highlighting concerns over Lorraine's disappearance. They recalled that in May 2018, 2 years before Lorraine vanished, an attacker named Robert Proud had attacked a woman who strikingly resembled her. He had abused her but did not kill her, and then evaded capture for a long time. Given his criminal history, it raised fears that there could be more victims. Although he had completed his prison sentence, investigators began considering Lorraine as a potential victim. At the time of her disappearance, Robert was living near the path Lorraine would have taken home. This connection led to his arrest, and police sought to extract a confession from him. They believed he had kidnapped, abused, and possibly killed her, and that he might have disposed of her body. It was suspected that he took her phone and pretended to communicate with her friends and family to buy himself time and create confusion. There was another theory regarding Lorraine's disappearance. Some believed that Robert might have attacked her, but instead of dying, she was hiding to avoid becoming his victim again. The detectives prioritized finding Lorraine because she was clearly in danger. Robert might have been holding her hostage. The situation could have escalated, posing a significant threat. To test this theory, they began reviewing surveillance footage from cameras along Lorraine's potential route that night. Even after narrowing down the time frame, they had about 11,000 hours of footage from over 400 cameras across 120 different locations. Analyzing this footage was time-consuming, but it proved worthwhile, yielding the first clues needed to catch the criminal. Eventually, they spotted a girl who matched Lorraine's description in the recordings. After leaving her friends at the bar, she headed toward her father's house without making any turns. She almost made it home, but a few blocks away, something caught her attention: a kebab shop on the ground floor of an apartment building, which was open at night. Lorraine went inside, likely to grab a snack, and then left to eat on a bench before continuing her way home. Around 2:45 a.m., she returned to the kebab shop, but this time accompanied by an unfamiliar man. This raised alarms because he didn't appear to be just a random passerby. The footage suggested they had interacted, and he had managed to get her attention. The police continued to investigate the recordings and noted that the young man had been following Lorraine after they left the shop. This behavior was concerning, especially since she seemed to be walking voluntarily and the street was deserted. Detectives suspected the man might be a predator who targeted his victim, potentially involved in Lorraine's disappearance and the messages she had sent to her loved ones after the incident. He maintained a distance while following her, trying to remain inconspicuous, and seemed to be assessing the situation. It looked as though he was stalking her, especially since she appeared intoxicated and was stumbling. She had a valuable phone, and with no one accompanying her that night, he saw an opportunity to attack. The police attempted to locate another recording to determine how Lorraine left the building from at least one camera, but were unsuccessful. It appeared she had not exited at all. They spent considerable time reviewing the video footage, only to confirm that Lorraine had not left since she was last seen. The detectives concluded that she might still be inside, possibly being held against her will. Unfortunately, by the time they gathered this information, 8 days had passed. Given this long duration, only a miracle could save Lorraine, who suffered from diabetes. Nevertheless, her family held on to hope. The police obtained a clear photo of the man who accompanied and followed Lorraine that night. They printed it out and began distributing it through the media to attract witnesses. Initially, they visited the kebab shop and spoke with the owner. He informed them that he lived above the shop but had rented the apartment below to a young man about a month ago. This young man had moved in unofficially and was very withdrawn, to the extent that the owner didn't know much about him. The owner even expressed doubts about the young man's name. When police officers visited the apartment, they anticipated finding a crime scene. However, everything was surprisingly neat and clean. The young man living there identified himself as Christopher Mayer and showed them his identification. There was no sign of Lorraine in the apartment, and he allowed the detectives inside without any resistance. They inspected the place thoroughly to ensure that no one was being held against their will. Christopher was then shown a photo of Lorraine, along with a CCTV image in which a man resembling him was seen accompanying her to the house. He strongly denied any connection, claiming that he did not know her. However, the clear photograph made the police skeptical, as the similarities were unmistakable. A brief verbal confrontation ensued, with Christopher maintaining his stance. During this exchange, he insisted that he would never bring a strange woman to his apartment. The police then became interested in Christopher's mobile phone, which they seized for examination. They discovered that it contained Lorraine's SIM card, although the card was currently missing. This evidence confirmed that he had at least seen her recently. Further investigation revealed that a suspicious post had been made on Lorraine's social media account using this mobile phone. It appeared that Christopher had sent strange messages to her loved ones. After the unsettling incident, whatever it was, he had taken Lorraine's phone. Rather than using it for communication, he inserted a SIM card into his own phone to access her contact list and social media account. This raised further suspicions about Christopher. He was the last person confirmed to have seen Lorraine alive, and his attempts to manipulate her account seemed suspicious. It became clear that he was trying to cover his tracks, raising questions about his motives that the authorities still needed to uncover. Christopher was arrested and charged with the kidnapping of Lorraine Cox. That same day, forensic experts arrived at his apartment to investigate. They used a substance called luminol to carefully examine the area. While they found several suspicious traces of evidence, the most alarming findings were in a nearby alley. During their search of the apartment, they discovered blood and numerous signs that supported the theory that Lorraine was dead, particularly around a garbage can. The forensic team speculated that Christopher might have disposed of evidence by throwing away the body. They searched the alley and found a large plastic bag inside one of the trash containers that contained human remains. However, it was not a complete body. Some parts, including the torso and head, were missing, making identification difficult. Consequently, the case shifted from a missing persons investigation to a murder investigation, and the work continued. Detectives learned that on the night of Lorraine's disappearance, in addition to Christopher, 5 other young men were present. However, none appeared on the CCTV footage with Lorraine. These men likely entered the apartment to buy food or for other reasons, but their involvement needed further investigation. They could have unwittingly been present during the crime or could have assisted in covering up evidence. Notably, the group behaved very differently. Except for Christopher, everyone was cooperative and willing to provide information. Upon further investigation, the 5 other young men were found to be locals who lived nearby. Since there was no evidence against them, they were released. In stark contrast, Christopher was uncooperative, reluctant to talk, and often gave vague or confusing answers. He seemed to believe that the police lacked sufficient evidence against him, but they soon discovered that his real name was Azam Mangori. This revelation marked a turning point in the investigation, as detectives confronted him with the truth, signaling the beginning of the unraveling of his story. Azam claims that he changed his name because he was born in the Kurdistan region of Iraq, where people who do not follow tradition can face severe punishment, including being stoned to death. As an adult, he left his conservative homeland but still lives in fear of being hunted down and killed. To avoid this dangerous situation, he began calling himself Christopher. He had been living illegally in the UK since December 2018 to avoid returning to Iraq. Azam also possessed a high-quality fake ID under the name Christopher Mayer to evade detection by immigration authorities. This explains why the landlord knew almost nothing about the man. He was very cautious, had not attended school or worked anywhere, and lived off odd jobs. However, the interrogation ended abruptly. After admitting to these things, he refused to talk about Lorraine. His previous admissions were not significant to the police. DNA testing confirmed that the remains found in a trash bin were those of Lorraine. In Azam's apartment, DNA traces and other evidence indicated that Lorraine had been killed there because Azam had failed to clean thoroughly. The police also discovered a large handsaw and replacement blades purchased after the crime. Other items found included a driver's license, a debit card, and a wallet, all mutilated. Nearby trash bins contained bloody clothing, Lorraine's phone, and a SIM card discarded in the sewer. Unfortunately, parts of her body were never recovered. Detectives analyzed the location data from Azam's mobile phone on the day of Lorraine's murder and the subsequent days when he disposed of evidence. This investigation led them to a location on the city's outskirts known as Tin Pit Hill. During the search, they found Lorraine's torso and head, which were not well concealed. Investigators noted unsettling details. A piece of clothing was stuffed into her mouth, and a patch of skin was missing from her back, possibly taken as a trophy by the perpetrator. Unfortunately, no other body parts were located, and the remains were in an advanced state of decomposition, complicating the determination of the cause of death. The forensic expert concluded that Lorraine had likely been strangled. Despite strong evidence of his guilt, Azam continued to deny his involvement and created false stories. He even attempted to involve banned organizations in the case. The trial commenced in spring 2021. Although he never confessed, Azam and his defense team significantly altered his narrative. He now claimed to have a normal orientation and stated that he encountered Lorraine when she came to his place late at night after a bar visit. He approached her on the street and convinced her to come to his apartment for some intimacy. Azam maintained that Lorraine voluntarily came to his apartment after drinking heavily and using illegal substances. He claimed that after trying those substances himself, he experienced severe distortion of perception and lost consciousness. When he regained awareness, he found Lorraine in the bathroom, unresponsive. He alleged that he saw a puddle of urine beneath her and believed she had overdosed. Azam attempted to perform CPR, but it was unsuccessful. In a panic and without knowing the emergency number, he sat on the bathroom floor next to her body. Hallucinations then began, and he claimed to see dark creatures emerging from her mouth, prompting him to shove a piece of his t-shirt into her mouth to stop it. He pushed the cloth in so far that it could have caused her to choke. Despite being in a state of panic, he managed to find and send a video he had recorded around the same time to a friend, where he appeared calm and even exhaled smoke into the camera. He explained that he filmed the video to help himself calm down. His behavior grew increasingly bizarre. Instead of calling for help, he decided to dispose of the body and planned to flee from his relatives. Naturally, this account sounded implausible, leaving him with no solid defense. According to Azam, he was unsure what he would do after Lorraine died and kept her body in his apartment until he decided to dispose of it. When his anxiety reached its peak, he chose to throw it away. He called a taxi to take the bag with the remains to a wooded area on the outskirts of Exeter. Prosecutors noted that he seemed to be obsessed with amputation, as evidenced by the precise cuts he made, which horrified forensic experts. It was clear he had researched this topic extensively and was well prepared. That evening, Azam tried to connect with people on an escort website, seeking companionship but was unsuccessful. Later, He saw Lorraine on the street eating alone and viewed her as an ideal target. It seems that Ozem may have premeditated this murder to fulfill his dark fantasies. Even with substantial evidence against him, his trial lasted 5 weeks. Ultimately, the jury found him guilty of murder and attempting to obstruct justice. He received a life sentence but is eligible for parole after 20 years, which means he could be released at the age of 44. Lorraine's boyfriend, Ellie, experienced profound grief, stating that a part of him died with her. He lives daily with this pain and struggles against despair. Lorraine's father, Tony, organized a charity march to rally support for his daughter. Participants silently walked the route she would have taken from the bar to her home, a journey she never completed. In the aftermath, Tony became an activist advocating for more CCTV cameras on UK streets to help prevent and solve violent crimes. He also started to make regular donations to an anti-abuse organization based in the UK. Even after justice was served, Lorraine Cox's family remained uncertain about how Ozem was able to lure her into his apartment. Security footage showed her following him willingly. Ozem claimed that he engaged her in conversation and offered her alcohol and a banned substance, which she accepted. However, toxicology reports found no traces of banned substances in her system, and a forensic expert stated that she did not die from diabetes, suggesting that Ozem's account might be false. Sadly, the truth about what happened in his apartment may never be revealed, as only Ozem and Lorraine know what truly occurred. Some believe Ozem exploited Lorraine's kindness by asking for help, and that she may have felt unable to refuse, ultimately leading her into a dangerous situation. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another horrible case. The case of Mariana Jocelyn Baltira. Mariana Jocelyn Baltira was born on October 24, 2000, in Morelos, a city in the state of Mexico. She was the eldest of 2 children. Her mother, Syra, had a difficult time giving birth to she, as she was born much earlier than expected. At birth, she has very low weight, causing doctors to be concerned about her chances of survival, and they expressed this to her parents. Mariana spent her first 2 months in a hospital's special ward for premature infants. Her mother prayed constantly for her recovery, and prayers were answered. Her condition improved rapidly, she gained weight, and by New Year's 2001, she was discharged home. So, the girl's parents celebrated the holiday with their daughter. While she grew up slim and beautiful, her health remained fragile from an early age. When Mariana was 4 years old, her family welcomed a second child, a baby boy named Bernardo. She adored her younger brother and helped her parents care for him from an early age. The 2 sisters were extremely close and almost inseparable. At the age of 6, Mariana was diagnosed with epilepsy, which required her to take regular medication to reduce the chances of seizures. Thanks to effective treatment and regular supervision from experts, her condition was well managed, allowing her to live a relatively normal life, much like other children her age. She pays great attention to health care, always follows a routine and takes medicine on time. Mariana draws very well and loved music. She was kind, sincere, and open-hearted. Everyone who knew her spoke highly of her. Despite this, she was very modest and shy, especially during her teenage years. She had only a few close friends, rarely went on dates, avoided parties, and hardly interacted with boys. She preferred spending time at home with her family. Petite and delicate, she looks much younger than her actual age. Although she is 16, she is often mistaken for being 13. Her care and love for animals is demonstrated by her regular care of homeless animals. Feeding them, treating them, and finding them a safe home. While in high school, she dreamed of becoming a veterinarian to provide professional care to animals in need. Mariana's parents often described her as too naive and trusting. This made them worry that someone would take advantage of her innocence and harm her. The neighborhood where her family lived was generally peaceful, and most of the residents know each other. However, their street was lined with many shops employing migrant workers, often unofficially. Some of these workers even lived inside the shops because they lacked housing. Of course, among these workers there are those with criminal records. However, the shop owner sees no problem with these workers, as long as they perform their duties responsibly. About 50 meters from Mariana's house is a butcher's shop where her parents often go to buy meat. The shop owner employed 4 workers, 2 locals who managed the sales and 2 outsiders who handled unloading, preparing the meat, and cleaning the shop. The outsiders lived in an attic on the shop's 2nd floor. As Mariana grew up, her parents occasionally asked her to do errands, such as buying meat at this butcher shop. There, she repeatedly encountered Juan Cruz Quintero Martinez, a handyman who lived on the 2nd floor. Just his appearance was enough to make her extremely scared. She often told her parents about this, describing his sinister gaze that made her blood run cold. However, he never approached or interacted with her, he only looked at her. Since there was no specific reason to accuse him, her parents decided it was best to not let her go to that store anymore. Instead, they began doing the shopping themselves. Then, one committed a minor theft, leading the store owner to fire him. From then on, no one heard from him for about a year. However, at the start of summer 2017, he showed up at the store again, asking his former employer for his job back. Surprisingly, he was rehired and moved back into the 2nd floor of the store. One day, Cyrus' niece was visiting their family. At that time, Mariana and her younger brother, Bernardo, were also at home because they have summer vacation. That morning, only Orlando, her father, had left the house around 9 a.m. Syra asked Mariana to go to the local supermarket to buy groceries for breakfast. Normally, she didn't let Mariana go out alone, but she thought her daughter was old enough to handle the task quickly and safely. It was bright outside, the streets were busy, and she believed nothing bad could possibly happen. Syra gave Mariana some money and asked her to buy milk, eggs, and vegetables. When little girl left the house, she wore an old t-shirt and pajama pants. The store was less than a few hundred meters away, so the trip to buy the groceries and return home in no more than 30 minutes. However, when an hour passed and little girl still hadn't returned, Syra became worried. She had left her phone at home, so Syra, holding her little niece in her arms, went out to search for her daughter. Syra walked to the store and asked the cashiers if they had seen Mariana, a young girl wearing glasses. They told Cyrus that the girl had been there, bought the groceries a couple of hours ago, and left. At that moment, Syra began to realize that something terrible had happened to her daughter. She hurried back home, asked Bernardo to watch over her niece, and went out again to continue the search. Syra began asking neighbors, street vendors, and passers-by if they had seen Mariana. However, the little girl seemed to have disappeared without a trace. Immediately after that, Syra immediately contacted the police and called her husband, Orlando. He took a break from work and rushed home to help search for Mariana. By the time the police arrived, dozens of neighbors, along with relatives and friends of the Baltira family, joined the search for Mariana. They distributed flyers with her picture. Initially, police asked the parents if their daughter might have gone on a date, met a friend, or visited someone. Her parents firmly denied these theories, insisting that she would never leave without informing them, especially since she had gone to the store in home clothes and carry a grocery bag. The area where Mariana disappeared had surveillance cameras, but almost none of them were functioning. Despite searching all day, no clues or traces of little girl were found. As night fell, the initial anxiety and panic turned into despair. The parents began to fear the worst, that their daughter would no longer live. On July 28, around 8 a.m., Mariana's parents received a call from a relative who lived nearby. The relative informed them that several police cars had arrived at the butcher's shop. Then, they quickly got ready and went to the scene. However, the police did not allow them inside, claiming that the situation had nothing to do with their daughter. Despite this, they were still resolutely not to leave. A few minutes later, after inspecting the premises, police officers approached Mariana's father, Orlando, and informed him that the body of a young girl, matching the description of Mariana, had been found on the second floor of the building. The body was lifeless and severely mutilated. Orlando was asked to come inside for identification, but the officers strongly advised against it, warning that the scene was extremely gruesome. When Orlando entered and saw the body of his beloved daughter lying in a pool of blood, he felt like the whole world had collapsed. He was at a loss as to how to break the sad news to his wife, who was waiting outside. The cause of death was determined to be massive blood loss from a deep wound to the stomach. It was later discovered that the criminal had cut out the girl's stomach while she was still alive and left her to bleed to death. Experts concluded that Mariana died in the early hours of July 28, just hours before her body was discovered. This meant she had been alive for nearly 24 hours after her disappearance. During that time, the murderer continuously tortured the girl. Then he caused the wound that caused her death. The murder weapon was identified as a butcher knife, which was found on the floor near her body. The store owner discovered the horrific incident when he came to work in the morning. According to the butcher shop owner, every last Thursday of the month, the shop closes for cleaning. On this day, the owner focused on organizational tasks, held meetings with suppliers, and submitted reports to the tax inspectorate. Meanwhile, the employees disinfected and cleaned the premises. On Thursday morning, July 27, 2017, when the owner arrived at the store, he immediately noticed bloodstains on the floor. At first, he thought one of his employees who lived on the second floor might have been injured. However, upon going upstairs, he was stunned to see his employee's belongings covered in blood, as well as a knife and the body of a young girl in a pool of blood. Additionally, a significant amount of money was missing from the cash register, which the criminal had likely taken in fleeing the scene. Two employees who lived and worked at the store immediately became suspects. However, an hour later, one of them arrived at the store, just as shocked as everyone by what had happened. He said that the day before, he was busy, so he had to go back to his hometown, and the other employee agreed to cover his shift. The police determined his account to be truthful, as there was no evidence placing him at the crime scene. As a result, he was removed from the list of suspects. By that time, investigators had obtained CCTV footage from the supermarket where Mariana was shopping on the last day of her life. The footage showed little girl entering the store, followed a few minutes later by Juan Martinez, the butcher. His behavior was unsettling. He appeared to stalk her, like a predator tracking its prey. Without purchasing anything, he left the supermarket shortly after she. After that, both of them vanished. Although there were street cameras in the area, they were not functioning. Additionally, none of the many passers-by or street vendors reported seeing anything unusual. Mariana's parents were adamant that their daughter would never willingly leave with Juan, regardless of what he might have said or done to persuade her. They believe he must have forced the girl into the butcher shop. However, this raised a question: why hadn't little girl screamed or called for help? Once again, no witnesses noticed anything out of the ordinary. In 2015, Juan came under police scrutiny for harassment and causing serious bodily harm. He had started working as an assistant in a butcher's shop earlier that year. According to the shop owner, he was diligent and raised no concerns for a long time. However, in mid-2016, he was caught stealing money and was fired. After losing his job, he moved back to the suburbs to live with his parents. There, he lived with his old and weak mother and his sister, who was her primary caregiver. Juan took advantage of his family, stealing money and belongings from the house. He abusing alcohol and illegal drugs. He frequently physically assaulted his mother and sister. Eventually, his sister, fed up with his abusive behavior, threatened to report him to the police. Because he was afraid of being arrested by the police, he decided to leave home. He went to his old employer, the owner of a butcher's shop, and asked to be rehired. The owner agreed, giving him both a job and allowed him to live on the second floor of the store. This happened in mid-June, about a month before a tragic incident unfolded. At first, Juan performed his work diligently. However, about a week later, he meets Mariana, who has changed and matured over the past year. While little girl avoided any interaction with him and never shopped at the butcher's shop, he began stalking her, following her through the streets and observing her daily routes. Another butcher, the who lives with Juan on the second floor, noticed his obsession with Mariana. Little did he know that Juan would soon commit a horrific crime. After Juan was identified as the sole suspect in the rape and murder of Mariana, all available resources were mobilized to find him. The police initially focused on his home, suspecting that his relatives might help him evade capture. However, his sister insisted that he was not welcome there and explained that he knew his family would immediately turn him in to the authorities. She showed no surprise over the horrific crime he had committed. In fact, she revealed that he had previously raped their elderly mother and even attacked her with a knife, threatening to cut her open like a pig if she didn't give him money for drugs. Finding Juan was a top priority for the police because he was highly aggressive, cruel, and a serious threat to others. The money he stole from the cash register could have lasted him a long time, but no one knew what he might do next. Will he reoffend after killing Mariana? For an entire month, the police searched the Morelos area and nearby suburbs, believing he couldn't have gone far. However, over time, they still could not find he. Information about Mariana's murder quickly spread nationwide through the media, causing police forces across the country to simultaneously hunt for the cruel murderer. Juan's photograph was broadcast daily on television, printed on the front pages of newspapers, and plastered on streets nationwide with the label "Ruthless Killer" at large. A substantial bounty was offered for any information about his location or help in capturing him, and the reward amount kept increasing. Yet, despite these efforts, the case made no progress. The search for Juan was very difficult. He had no contact with his family, no friends, no social media accounts, no mobile phone, and he didn't use credit cards. After 6 months of trying to locate him without any success, the reward for information about him was raised to about $250,000. Even so, there were no leads. Juan was finally captured in August 2019, 2 years after Mariana's murder. He was found nearly 1,000 kilometers away from the crime scene. In another state, thanks to an elderly woman who recognized him on the street. She noticed his suspicious behavior, as he constantly hid his face with a hood and sunglasses, and reported him to the police. She unaware that he was one of the most wanted criminals in Mexico. Juan was arrested right on the street, and to the surprise of the authorities, he did not resist. He calmly extended his hands, allowing officers to put handcuffs on him. The next day, after confirming his identity, the authorities transported him to Morelos, where the crime took place. He was placed in custody in a local prison while awaiting trial. In May 2022, 5 years after the tragic incident, the court sentenced Juan Cruz Quintero Martinez, who committed the murder and rape, to life in prison without parole. He must also pay approximately $49,000 in compensation for the damages he caused to Mariana's family. Mariana's parents and younger brother expressed that the arrest of her killer brought them great relief, as it ensured he could no longer harm other girls. However, they also acknowledged that no punishment, not even life imprisonment or restitution, could ease the pain in their hearts. Their beloved daughter and older sister was gone, and they would have to carry this sorrow for the rest of their lives. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Laura Conley. Laura Conley was born on March 15, 1978, in the United States as the third child of Carleen and James Conley. She grew up happily with her sisters, enjoying a loving and caring family environment. However, everything changed when Carleen and James divorced. At that time, Laura was a teenager and deeply affected by her parents' separation. Struggling with her emotions, she turned to alcohol for comfort, which eventually led to an addiction to psychotropic substances. Her mother believes Laura's addiction stems from the failure of their marriage. Carleen was born on June 13, 1945, in Virginia. Her 3 daughters were her top priority. Carleen blamed herself for the impact the divorce had on her youngest daughter, Laura. Carleen was always understanding and helpful to Laura, especially during difficult times. Family members and close friends often noted Laura's irritable behavior. While Carleen's other daughters married and became independent, Laura continued to live in the family home in Kentucky. She was unemployed and required constant care. Laura believed she was mentally ill and frequently sought medical help for her medications. However, there came a point when her health care providers stopped prescribing her these medications. Desperate to get her medications, Laura began breaking into neighbors' homes to steal any pills she could find. Laura often took advantage of her mother's kindness, constantly calling her at work and causing disruptions that forced Carleen to quit her job. In 2008, Laura was convicted of petty theft, but she was quickly released because her mother posted bail. Unfortunately, the situation got worse. Laura not only verbally abused her mother, but also physically abused her. Although Laura physically harmed Carleen on several occasions, Carleen still did not report her daughter or ask her to leave the house. When an incident occurred, Laura needed a mental health evaluation, but Carleen still welcomed her daughter back home, feeling obligated to take care of Laura. It is common for parents who have experienced violence from their children to hesitate in reporting the incidents. They often fear that doing so may harm their relationship with their child. However, this reluctance can endanger their own safety. Laura's violent behavior was not only directed at her mother, it also extended to her boyfriend, Chris Lewin. Laura faced legal consequences for her actions against him on 2 separate occasions. One notable incident occurred in late October 2014. Laura woke Chris while he was asleep and accused him of cheating, leading to an argument that turned physical. During the confrontation, Laura not only bit Chris but also used a kitchen knife to lightly cut his hand. As a result of the incident, Laura was given a light sentence in order to attend anger management therapy. However, court records indicate that there is no evidence that she continued to participate in the program. At age 35, Laura continued her behavior. On January 7, 2015, she was arrested again for biting her boyfriend's finger when he intervened to stop her from attacking Carleen. He could not understand why Laura was so deeply hostile towards her mother. Carleen had always been a caring, devoted mother to her 3 daughters and proud of her 5 grandchildren. She worked hard to support Laura and give her the help she needed to overcome her difficulties. Unfortunately, despite Carleen's unconditional love and good intentions, Laura began to abuse her mother over time. 5. Laura called 911 to report an incident at her home. She informed police that a home invasion had occurred, resulting in her mother being shot to death. Officers from the Independence, Taylor Mill, and Covington police departments quickly arrived at the scene. They witnessed a horrific scene, Laura covered in blood, and her mother, 69-year-old Carleen Conley, lying on the kitchen counter with multiple stab wounds and in critical condition. When police asked Laura what had happened, she claimed she did not remember because she had been unconscious. She mentioned that about 2 hours before the incident, several people had knocked on her door asking for candy, which was common on Halloween, even though the holiday was still far away. She provided police with a description of the suspect, which led to a search of the area. However, police were unable to find anyone matching Lara's description. To continue the investigation, police took Lara to the police station for questioning. After arriving at the police station, Lara provided additional details. She mentioned that she was being pursued for money owed to drug dealers. Additionally, Lara gave police inconsistent accounts of how she found her mother's body. Initially, she said that she found Carlene dead when she returned home. However, in the same conversation, she later said that after waking up in the basement, she went upstairs and found her mother dead on the kitchen floor. However, police Mike Richman and Jim Moore quickly connected Lara to the crime within hours of starting their investigation. It became clear that she had lied to the police about what happened. The evidence showed that there had been no break-in, no fingerprints were found on the doors or windows to suggest that anyone else had been there. This led to the conclusion that Lara was the only person in the house when Carlene was murdered. Therefore, in the early morning of Sunday, March 15th, while Lara was celebrating her 37th birthday, the police arrested her for Carlene's murder. The next day, Monday, March 16th, Lara appeared before the judge via video link and stated that she pleaded not guilty. Police later booked her into the county jail without bail on charges of murder and domestic violence. She was also ordered not to contact her boyfriend. Prosecutor Rob Sanders said Carlene's murder would have a significant impact on the community, which is typically quiet and has a low crime rate. The medical examiner's report found that the attack on Carlene was severe, with an autopsy showing she had been stabbed 77 times, with 27 stab wounds and 2 bite wounds. On March 24th, Lara appeared in court and told the judge that she had no money, assets, or property, so she could not afford an attorney. The judge appointed a public defender for her and the hearing began. During the court proceedings, Officer Michael confirmed that Lara had opened the door to the police and that she was the only person in the house other than Carlene. He described finding Carlene on the kitchen floor, surrounded by several knives. He also noted that Lara was covered in blood, with her shirt, arms, legs, face, lips, and nose all covered in blood. After hearing the police testimony, the judge sent the case to the jury, who convicted Lara Conley of murder on April 16, 2015. Lara's trial began on January 3, 2017, nearly a year and 9 months after the crime. The jury heard testimony from about 30 witnesses. The prosecution presented evidence from police officers involved in the investigation and from Carlene's family. In contrast, the defense argued that Lara acted in self-defense due to severe emotional distress. The defense claimed that the knife attack was in response to an attack by her mother. When Lara took the stand, she explained to the jury that she and her mother had argued about her birthday celebration. During the argument, her mother hit her on the head with a heavy object. Lara testified that she could not remember anything that happened after that, including how she got injured or her 911 call. The jury learned that a physical examination of Lara after the crime revealed she had cuts on her head and back, bruises on her body, and a hematoma under her eye. On March 23, 2017, the parties presented their closing arguments. Assistant District Attorney Lawrence summarized the evidence and highlighted the many conflicting and unconfirmed accounts that Lara presented. Later that day, after 3 hours of deliberation, the jury found Lara Conley guilty of first-degree murder and recommended a 27-year prison sentence. Lara's legal team filed for a retrial, claiming that her sentence was unfair. The lawyers argued that Lara was dealing with mental health issues, including bipolar disorder, depression, anxiety, and panic attacks. In their appeal, the defense emphasized that Lara had consumed large amounts of alcohol and a drug intended to cause drowsiness shortly before the incident. However, the judge rejected the appeal and ordered a psychological evaluation by court-appointed experts. The defense argued for the cancellation of the preliminary trial and requested a new trial, claiming that the initial trial was flawed, leading to Lara's guilty verdict. The prosecutor was allowed to use evidence from a prior assault committed by Lara. In June 2019, the Kent Supreme Court ruled that the trial court had made a mistake, which led to the overturning of Lara's 27-year prison sentence for her mother's murder and ordered a new trial. However, instead of going through a retrial, Lara opted to accept a plea agreement, which reduced her sentence to 20 years. As a result, she will be eligible for parole in 2032. Currently, Lara is incarcerated at the Women's Correctional Facility in Kent, where she is serving her sentence. Lara killed her own mother and displayed no remorse, leaving unresolved questions about her motives. Additionally, in just 10 years, Lara could be released. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Sarah Ludeman. Sarah Ludeman was born on December 7, 1990 in the United States. Her father, Charles, was a taxi driver, and her mother, Gay, was a surgeon. Although they were originally from New York, they moved to Florida in search of a better living environment. During her school years, Sarah faced ridicule from her classmates because of her weight, which had a significant impact on her psychological well-being. To cope with this, she turned to her father for support. From then on, she became very close to her father. She often sat next to him in a taxi, turned on the radio at high volume and sang along to country songs. Charles introduced her to new lessons, games, and concerts. Over time, Sarah became more confident, and during her high school years at Johns Hopkins in St. Petersburg, she made many friends. She graduated with excellent grades, and many teachers recognized her potential, predicting a bright future for her. Sarah was a bright and talented young woman who excelled in her studies and aspired to be a veterinarian. Her parents, Charles and Gay, were proud of her career choice as it reflected her deep kindness and compassion. While many of her friends were starting to date, Sarah found herself attracted only to unattainable figures, like famous musicians and athletes. By the age of 16, Sarah was content living her own life without the desire for romantic relationships. Very close to her, although they never met, was another girl her age named Rachel Wade. Rachel was born on February 27, 1990. Her family was a typical American middle-class family. Her mother worked as a teacher's assistant at an elementary school, and her father was a truck driver. Rachel was a quiet child who loved to play and have fun. Everything changed for Rachel when she entered her teenage years. At 15, she became withdrawn, moody, and frequently argued with her parents, particularly her mother. Misunderstandings arose for various reasons, such as Rachel's refusal to help with household chores or disagreements about her friends. When she was unhappy with something, she would run away. At first, her parents, Barry and Janet, searched for her on their own, but when Rachel began to disappear more frequently, they felt compelled to call in the police. They soon realized that Rachel's main problem was her desire to impress boys. She became obsessed with them, and when a boy showed interest in her, she would focus on him and ignore everything else. Rachel fell into a cycle of moving from one relationship to another. By the time she turned 17, her parents had lost all patience. They were exhausted from searching for her and trying to convince her to come home. Rachel became increasingly difficult to handle, even resorting to violence against her parents. During her last attempt to leave, she was open about her plans. She told Barry and Janet that she intended to move in with a guy named Javier Loboy. At that point, she was just a month away from her 17th birthday. Rachel's relationship with Javier ended abruptly. As expected, the police were called to their apartment several times due to arguments. When they broke up, Rachel wasn't too upset. She quickly found comfort with another friend of Javier's, Joshua Camacho. Joshua, with sharp facial features, curly black hair, and golden skin that captivated her. He was physically strong and had a way with words. After high school, he didn't pursue further education and instead took on odd jobs. He enjoyed taking selfies, posing with a gun, or showing off a tattoo. Joshua often relied on the girls for support and rarely accomplished anything on his own. Erin Slow Tower, Joshua's ex-lover, became pregnant and gave birth to a child. Joshua took no responsibility for his daughter and did not pay any child support. Instead, he continued to live a carefree life in his parents' house, with no plans for the future. Joshua had a knack for attracting new girls. However, he was very controlling and even argued with his girlfriend. Joshua dropped out of school and worked as a waiter, which helped him pay for his apartment. From the beginning, he tried to assert his dominance over Rachel, controlling her every move. Later they broke up several times, but each breakup only made Rachel love him more, and she was always the first to come back. One day, Sarah Ludeman visited the restaurant where Joshua worked, and her life changed forever. She fell in love with him at first sight. Joshua made Sarah feel extremely special. Soon, Sarah mustered up the courage and told her parents about her feelings. However, Charles and Gay doubted the sincerity of Joshua, who clearly loved no one but himself and only met gullible and naive girls who could easily believe his charming words. Her parents decided to be patient, hoping that the relationship would eventually end on its own. However, this did not happen. The teenage love story continued to develop. It got to the point where Sarah transferred to another school to be closer to Joshua. Although her parents disapproved of this decision, they held on to the hope that their daughter would eventually realize the truth and that things would return to normal. During the first 6 months of their relationship, Joshua and Sarah frequently argued in public, often so violently that the police were called. One day, Sarah got into a fight with Erin, the mother of Joshua's daughter. During the argument, Joshua became angry and punched Sarah in the face, but she did not press charges. It's unclear how he managed to manipulate all 3 women, but it seems the 3 girls' different schedules made it easier for Joshua to deceive. Sarah had to be home by 11 p.m. at the request of her parents, while Erin worked 2 jobs and was only free at night. Despite her jealousy and sometimes finding Joshua with other women, Erin always returned to him. Rachel, on the other hand, had a busy job but had her own apartment, where Joshua would sometimes stay. When Sarah and Rachel discover each other, instead of facing Joshua together, they focus on competing for his affection. Their rivalry takes place primarily online through text messages and social media. Both girls are certain that they will win Joshua's heart, believing that he will eventually choose one of them. This leads to incidents such as slashed tires, broken mirrors, and street arguments. Their behavior worries their parents, who feel helpless and unsure of how to intervene. Conflict between Sarah and Rachel escalated from simple online arguments and minor issues to serious threats of violence. After Joshua and Sarah's trip to New York, Sarah posted photos of them together on MySpace, which greatly angered Rachel. On August 29, 2008, Rachel left an angry voice message for Sarah, threatening her life. In her message, Rachel not only expressed her anger, but also bragged about how financially independent and attractive she was. Sarah later saved these messages, possibly out of fear for her safety. Rachel had been texting Sarah all morning, bragging about her relationship with Joshua. Sarah's best friend Ashley had been encouraging her to get over Joshua for the past few months, reminding her that she deserved better, but Sarah never took her advice. During lunch, while the other students were in the cafeteria, Sarah cried in Ashley's arms. Ashley tried to cheer her up by suggesting that they go to the mall or the movies after school, but Sarah refused, insisting that she needed to talk to Joshua. Her situation worsened when she went to Rachel's MySpace page and saw a post in which Rachel expressed her love for Joshua. Although Rachel did not mention him by name, Sarah immediately realized who she was referring to. Frustrated, Sarah sent Joshua several text messages but received no response. She then accused him of ignoring her. Joshua eventually responded but tried to change the subject away from Rachel. After a few messages, Sarah rushed to see him. Meanwhile, Rachel, who had the day off from work, offered to spend time with Joshua, but he refused, saying that he needed to take care of his sister's children. Not believing his excuses, Rachel decides to go to his sister Janet's house to confirm if Joshua is lying. Before leaving, she puts a knife in her pocket. When she arrives, Rachel finds Sarah, Joshua, Janet, and another girl, Gilly, there. Rachel became upset when she saw Sarah's car parked near the house. The girls noticed Rachel passing by the house several times. Rachel then texted Joshua, asking why he was with other women. He responded by telling her to go home, saying that he didn't like her anymore. However, he only said this to reassure Sarah, as he was actually planning on seeing Rachel later. It was almost 11 o'clock, and Sarah knew she needed to go home, but she couldn't bring herself to leave, because Rachel had come downstairs and texted her, wanting to talk. Joshua and Sarah decided it was best to stay in the house and wait for the Rachel to leave. Sarah texted her parents to let them know she would be home late and came up with an excuse to avoid explaining Rachel's obsessive behavior. After midnight, Sarah prepared to go home because Rachel was no longer outside. Meanwhile, Janet and Gilly had asked for a ride to McDonald's, and Sarah felt safer going with them. Rachel went to visit her ex-boyfriend Javier. Meanwhile, Ashley, a friend of Sarah's, learned of Rachel's location and quickly informed Sarah. Without hesitation, Sarah, Janet, and Gilly went to where Rachel was. At that moment, Rachel began sending threatening messages, claiming that she would kill both Sarah and Joshua. She was standing on the street when Sarah's car slowed down nearby. Sarah, Janet, and Gilly got out of the car and ran towards Rachel. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Rachel pulled a knife from her pocket and attacked Sarah, stabbing her twice in the chest. Sarah collapsed, bleeding from a severe wound. Despite her condition, she managed to contact Joshua and explain what had happened. Joshua quickly rushed to Sarah's house to inform her parents. When Charles heard about the tragedy, he rushed to the scene. Meanwhile, Rachel's ex-lover Javier was on the phone with an emergency worker and tried to tear his shirt to stop Sarah's bleeding. Rachel went to a bench, sat down, and threw the knife away. Sarah was taken to the hospital. An hour later, at approximately 3 a.m. on April 15, 2009, Sarah died. The investigation was quick. Joshua and several witnesses testified that Rachel attacked Sarah with a knife. When questioned about why she brought a weapon, Rachel claimed it was for self-defense. At that time, she was unaware of the severity of the wounds she had inflicted on Sarah. The officers asked if Sarah was armed, and Rachel answered no. She maintained that she had not meant to harm Sarah and was actually trying to escape from her. After a lengthy interrogation, the police informed Rachel that Sarah had died from her injuries. This news caused Rachel to faint. Police used witness testimonies to piece together what happened. Consequently, Rachel was officially charged with second-degree murder and taken to the county jail with a bond set at $500,000. Despite this serious situation, Rachel did not fully grasp the gravity of her circumstances. This was evident in her phone conversations with friends and family, where she frequently discussed her plans for life after her release, firmly believing that the jury would support her. The trial started on July 20, 2010. The prosecution argued that the intense and hostile dynamics within the love triangle were the motive for Sarah's murder. They highlighted that Rachel had been threatening Sarah on social media prior to the crime, claiming that Rachel's attack was so brutal that the knife blade was bent during the assault. The defense pointed out that Sarah was physically larger than Rachel, emphasizing that Rachel acted in self-defense in a dangerous situation where there were multiple girls present. Witnesses from that night, Janet, Gilly, gave their accounts. Janet and Gilly confirmed that they heard Rachel threaten to kill both Sarah and Joshua. Prosecutors presented a recording of the 911 call from that night. In addition, recordings from 2008 and text messages saved by Sarah were introduced into evidence and played a key role in determining the outcome of the case. The jury, which reached its verdict in just 2 hours, found 20-year-old Rachel Wade guilty of second-degree murder. During her trial, she received a 27-year prison sentence, with the possibility of parole after 20 years for good behavior. Rachel was then sent to a women's correctional facility to serve her sentence. Joshua, who was in Florida, left the state. Some believe he went to New York to visit relatives and avoid media scrutiny, while others think he returned to Florida to reconcile with Aaron. In 2011, Rachel, who was in prison, agreed to an interview. She expressed remorse for the events that occurred and wished she could go back in time and make different choices. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Hannah Graham. Hannah Graham grew up in a loving family that appreciated the little joys of life. Hannah was smart, healthy, and musically gifted. She was a vibrant young woman until she met Jesse Matthew, and her vibrant life took a dark turn. In every photo, from childhood to adolescence, Hannah is smiling. Those who knew her knew of Hannah's great ambition and ambition. Tragically, it seems her bright future was cut short by an unexpected evil that could devastate a life in an instant. On September 12, 2014, at approximately 9:30 p.m., Hannah left her home in Grand Marquette to meet friends. By 10 p.m., they went to FIC restaurant in Charlotte-Sweely. After spending some time together, Hannah later went to a party at the Caden Plaza Apartments on Tina Street. During the party, she told her friends that she was feeling unwell and wanted to leave. One friend offered to walk her home, but Hannah declined, as she lived only a few minutes away from Caden Plaza. Around midnight, Hannah said goodbye to her friends, but instead of going home, she walked in the opposite direction toward the Tempo restaurant. Security cameras on the buildings along her route captured footage of her as she headed to the shopping center on Charlotte Street, where Tempo was located. It was already September 13th, and at 12:56 a.m., the Hannah sent a message to a friend saying she was lost and not feeling well. At that time, Hannah was believed to be very drunk. It was unclear whether she had wandered into a different part of town by accident or due to her intoxication. Meanwhile, 32-year-old Jesse Matthew, a taxi driver, stopped at the Lazy Parrot for a drink. Afterward, he visited several other bars in the city center, where he harassed women. The women later reported that Jesse's behavior was inappropriate and crossed boundaries. Jesse eventually spotted Hannah. He initially walked past her, but then realized this was a great opportunity and decided to turn around and follow her. Surveillance footage captured Hannah wandering the streets, seemingly confused about her surroundings and the time. Jesse approached her, hugged her, and they headed to the Tempo restaurant. Inside, he bought 2 drinks. Witnesses later gave conflicting accounts. Some claimed Hannah was inside the bar area, while others claimed she was outside at a table. There was also no clear evidence that she was served a drink. Hannah's final text message to her friend, saying she was stuck, was sent in the middle of the night, but the meaning behind her words remains unclear. On September 14th, when Hannah's family could not reach her, they became alarmed and reported her missing to the police. Hannah was a person who always notified her family before going out. She was never away for long and always answered the phone. As time went on, her family's worries grew. Meanwhile, the police began searching for Hannah, with state and federal police joining the effort. Hannah's disappearance caused considerable concern in Charlotte Sweeney and the Albert Mall area, especially since there had been previous cases of missing women. Hannah's case quickly attracted public attention and the search for her intensified. Through a detailed investigation and the collection of video footage from numerous city cameras, police were able to piece together a timeline of the events of that tragic night. Hundreds of people gathered at the University of Virginia to support Hannah's family. Many volunteers joined the search, doing everything they could to help Hannah return safely. Hannah had helped others in need, and now it was their turn to help her. Jesse Matthew grew up in a low-income family. He faced constant bullying and humiliation at school, which led to a stutter and difficulties in his studies. Despite these challenges, he persevered and continued his education, eventually earning a full football scholarship to Liberty University in 2002. However, he was soon accused of violence against another student, prompting him to transfer to a different school. Upon entering Christopher Newport University, Jesse could no longer contain his desire, and soon rumors began to spread of a new sexual assault committed by Jesse. The victims remained unknown, having dropped out of school. Jesse made a living by working odd jobs for a while, switching jobs from time to time. In 2005, a young woman was attacked and raped in the Fairfax district while walking home from the store. The attacker threatened to kill her if she resisted. Although she survived the ordeal, she was hospitalized and treated, which included procedures to collect DNA samples. Police gathered evidence from the crime scene to create a DNA profile, but it did not match any suspects in police databases. Due to her fear for her safety, the woman ultimately chose to return to her home country of India. Surprisingly, family and friends described Jesse as a kind and helpful person. Even his ex-girlfriends found him charming and gentle. In fact, Jesse faced multiple sexual assault charges. One of the police officers who was friends with Jesse said that he had a very difficult childhood and was abused during his school years. Jesse was bullied a lot and forced to keep things a secret. Although this was never fully confirmed by his family or friends, Jesse himself stated that he was abused in his early years. This may explain how he went from being a good person to someone with malicious intent. Jesse's father struggled with alcoholism and was often absent from home for long periods of time. In 2006, his father was arrested for breaking the law. Did these experiences shape Jesse's personality and lead him to become a serial killer? On September 19, police obtained a search warrant for the Jesse's apartment. They seized a mobile phone without a SIM card and a pair of men's shorts. DNA tests revealed both Jesse's and Hannah's biological material on these items. A second search warrant was executed for his apartment. And the next day, police announced that while he had not yet been formally charged with Hannah's kidnapping, he was the last person seen with her on the night she disappeared. During this second search, several bags of evidence were collected, including a phone, laundry, bedding, a pillow, clothing, a toothbrush, test tubes of hair, a wallet, and a cigar butt. Police obtained a third search warrant, allowing them to collect a pair of white shorts, a maroon shirt, and a towel with a reddish-brown stain. They also seized an orange Chevrolet Suburban belonging to Jesse. On September 20th, Jesse arrived at the Charlotte police station with Will, requesting an attorney and refusing to answer any questions about Hannah. Afterward, he left the station, got into his car, and sped away. Police pursued him, but he managed to evade capture. A nationwide search for him was initiated. It was later revealed that Jesse had obtained a new driver's license and withdrawn most of his bank funds. Jesse's family has urged him to share any information he has about Hannah with the police. His aunt, Alice Fletcher, has pledged to support Hannah's parents. Many people in Charlotte have joined the search efforts. Additionally, Hannah's college friends have provided significant support to the family. On September 24th, Jesse was seen on a beach in Texas. Since his car had been confiscated, he was living in a tent there. A bystander recognized him from a news report and called 911. Jesse was arrested and identified as a suspect in the kidnapping of Hannah. A $100,000 reward was offered for information about Hannah's location. He was taken to the Charlotte Regional Jail and held without bail while the search for Hannah continued. On October 18, a body was discovered on a plot of land on Old Lynch Road in Albemarle County. The site was located behind an abandoned house and surrounded by brush. Police cordoned off the crime scene after the discovery of the body. The sheriff noted that further testing was needed to confirm the identity and expressed gratitude to those searching. A crop top and jeans matching those worn by Hannah were found nearby. A wristwatch was also found, but no underwear, shoes, or cell phone were found. A local resident informed police that on the morning of September 13, he noticed Jesse's car parked on the road behind the house. The car doors were closed, and there was no one inside. It was determined that the Jesse was familiar with the area, having worked as a taxi driver nearby for several years. The body was sent to Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Kevin Y. for examination. He conducted an autopsy and concluded that the death resulted from intentional violence, with strangulation being the likely cause. Further tests showed broken noses, and the examiner confirmed that the victim was Hannah Graham. DNA evidence was collected, allowing police to link Jesse to Hannah's murder. Police then also connected him to another crime. This was the January 2010 kidnapping of Morgan Harrington. Her body was discovered on a farm in Albemarle County by the farm owner, who initially mistook them for animal bones. When he realized they were human bones, he quickly contacted the police. Morgan's body and Hannah's body were found just 6 miles apart. The DNA from Morgan's shirt matched that of Jesse Matthew, and surprisingly, it also matched evidence collected in 2005 in Fairfax. On February 10, 2015, Jesse Matthew was formally charged with the murder of Hannah Graham. He faced charges of first-degree murder and kidnapping. Prosecutors sought the death penalty. Attorneys proposed a plea deal that would have reduced his sentence if he confessed to the murders of Hannah Graham and Morgan Harrington. The victims' families met to discuss the deal, but when they learned that it only carried a 25-year sentence for murder, they rejected it. On March 2, 2016, Jesse Matthew accepted a plea deal in which he confessed to the murders of Morgan Harrington and Hannah Graham. In exchange, the death penalty was removed. Jesse's family had hoped Judge Chad would take into account his troubled upbringing and the sexual abuse he had endured. Despite this, the judge found Jesse Matthew guilty of first-degree murder and kidnapping of Morgan Harrington and Hannah Graham. He was sentenced to 4 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. Jesse's trial lasted less than 3 days. Along with the charges previously mentioned, he was charged with assaulting and raping a girl in Fairfax County in 2005. Jesse Matthew was sentenced to 3 life terms in the Fairfax girl case. As the judge read out his sentence, he emphasized the violent nature of Jesse's attacks. After the verdict, Jesse's mother screamed and had to leave the courtroom. Throughout the trial and sentencing, Jesse remained silent. In December 2020, Jesse was taken from Sac State Prison to Richmond Hospital under police escort, where he was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer. The terrible crimes he committed had already been resolved, and by December 2022, Jesse Matthew was still alive, with no additional updates on his health at that time. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Courtney Schulhoff. Courtney Schulhoff was born in 1987 in Florida to Stephen and Tracy. While details about her childhood are limited, we do know that her parents divorced when she was young, which was a challenging experience for her. After the divorce, her mother moved out and Courtney stayed with her father. Eventually, Stephen faced significant financial problems, which led to their move. In 2003, Courtney attended Lyman High School. She was a hard-working student at first, but after her parents divorced, her grades began to drop rapidly. She rarely attended school, stopped trying, and became a poor student. Outside of school, Courtney's personality also changed. She began hanging out with a group of friends who were known for bad behavior, which negatively affected her. Tensions between Courtney and her father Stephen escalate, forcing her to temporarily move in with her mother Tracy. However, this arrangement does not last long. Tracy cannot accept the changes in Courtney, so Stephen has no choice but to welcome her back home. Once again, Courtney and her father face unresolved issues, including her difficulties with school. During this time, Courtney and her friends often gather at the racetrack across from her school, where she meets and begins dating a 20-year-old college student named Michael. Michael Morin was a former high school football player who, unlike Courtney, had performed well academically. He received straight A's and was now attending a nearby college. His parents had high expectations for him, but everything changed after he met Courtney. After a few weeks of talking, they began spending all their free time together. Courtney's father, Stephen, was extremely upset about her poor grades, and this only intensified when he learned about her decision to be with Michael. He quickly started blaming Michael for this choice. Their relationship was already strained, and this situation made it worse. Courtney felt that her father didn't want her to be happy. She tried to explain that Michael was a good person, but Stephen refused to see him in that way. He had heard rumors about Michael being involved in car theft and wanted to caution Courtney that no matter what Michael did, he would never earn her father's approval. After a series of arguments, Courtney began to accuse her father of being abusive, and there was some evidence to support her accusations. One day, when Courtney invited some friends over, including Michael, her father Stephen came home earlier than expected, leading to an altercation. While Courtney and her friends were drinking and smoking, Stephen suddenly entered the room. Enraged, he yelled at his daughter for throwing a party without his permission. After a brief argument, Stephen punched Courtney in the face in front of her friends. The situation between Courtney and her father, Stephen, remained tense. Although Courtney had stopped going to school, she refused to find a job and frequently used her father's credit card without asking. She would come home with new clothes and items purchased online. By this time, Stephen's financial situation had worsened, making things even more challenging. For several months, Courtney continued her troubling behavior, often sneaking Michael into their home at night while her father was asleep. Eventually, Stephen prohibited Courtney from seeing her boyfriend, but she ignored his wishes and invited Michael over whenever she pleased. Every conversation between Courtney and her father focused on his harsh criticism of Michael. As the months passed, the situation became increasingly difficult. One day, Stephen checked his bank account and noticed some money missing. He called the police, reporting his daughter to them, apparently to teach her a lesson. After speaking with the police, Courtney returned home, now much more afraid of her father. She began to see him as strict, unkind, and a real threat. She devised a plan, determined to break free from Stephen's control. By the end of 2003, Stephen was in a relationship with a woman named Elaine. During this same time, Courtney was working towards earning her high school diploma while continuing to date Michael. Frustrated by Courtney's father's efforts to control their relationship, the couple decided to run away. However, they faced a major obstacle. Neither had a car or any money. Their plan was to take Michael's father's car and drive to Maryland, where they could ask Courtney's grandparents for financial assistance. Unfortunately, things did not go as planned. Michael stole his father's car, but while on the way to Maryland, they changed their minds and turned back home. This decision led to serious consequences for both Michael and Courtney. Michael's parents reported him to the police, and he was charged with car theft, resulting in a 70-day. Furthermore, Michael's parents insisted that he end his relationship with Courtney, believing it to be detrimental to him. This relationship was indeed harmful to both of them. Michael was forced to break up with Courtney, but he refused. As a result, his parents decided to kick him out of the house, leaving him homeless. He began sneaking into Courtney's apartment to sleep there, something he had done occasionally before, but now happened every night. Additionally, Michael dropped out of college, changed his address to Stevens, and put Stevens' phone number on his parole application without Stevens' involvement or permission. Although Michael had nowhere to live, he made no attempt to find a job, which left Courtney to pay all of her father's credit card bills. When Steven attempted to talk to his daughter about her mounting debt, an unforeseen tragedy struck first. On February 10, 2004, Elaine, Steven's new girlfriend, attempted to call him multiple times, but he didn't answer. Concerned that something might be wrong, she decided to go to his house. Between 2 o'clock and 4 p.m., she drove to his place and was surprised by what she saw. Michael, Courtney's boyfriend, was walking down the street with Steven's dog, wearing one of Steven's t-shirts. Feeling uneasy, Elaine got out of her car and approached the front door of Steven's house, where she found Courtney standing by the entrance. Elaine tried to enter, but the door was locked. She asked Courtney where her father was, but Courtney said she didn't know and left without opening the door, taking the key with her. Elaine saw that Steven's truck was still parked in its usual spot, which made her even more worried, so she decided to call the police. When the local police arrived, they quickly obtained a search warrant following Elaine's phone call. They entered the house through the back door and began their search, uncovering a horrific scene. Inside Steven's room, they found blood splatter on the walls. The most shocking discovery was Steven's body in a plastic trash can. He had a severed ear and a disfigured face. It was clear that the perpetrator didn't bother to hide their actions. Additionally, the police found several bank statements on the dining room table, many of them circled in pen. Meanwhile, Courtney was missing. Elaine learned of the altercation between Steven, his daughter, and her boyfriend, so the police quickly began a search. The police found Michael in the restroom of the mall across the street from Steven's house. As Elaine said, he was wearing one of Steven's t-shirts and had Steven's wallet, car keys, and credit cards in his possession. The police took Michael in for questioning. After leaving her father's apartment earlier that day, Courtney simply went to her mother's house, where her mother made her turn herself in. During questioning, Michael initially insisted that he knew nothing about the murder. Michael claimed that after being kicked out of the house, he had been living in Courtney's closet. One day, when Steven returned home, Courtney woke Michael up and told him that her father had found out he was staying with them. When he asked Courtney why, she said she would explain later and asked him to walk the dog, which he did. Michael ran to the mall because he was worried that Steven would find out he was near his home. However, after the police informed him of Steven's death, his story changed dramatically. He began to cry and said that after Steven tried to confront Courtney about the missing money on his credit card, she asked Michael to kill Steven and he agreed. His story shifts from being unaware of the death to saying he was asked to kill Steven. Courtney's interrogation was also unproductive. She gave two different statements. In her first interrogation, she blamed Michael entirely, claiming she had no knowledge of her father's death until he informed her. In a later confession, however, she revealed much more information to police. Courtney maintained that the murder was Michael's idea and admitted to helping him by removing Steven's dog from the room before the incident and placing the bat by the bedroom door. She said she heard everything while Michael killed her father. But by the end of the trial in September 2006, her story had changed dramatically. Courtney was convicted of murder. When asked if she had any final statements, she maintained her innocence throughout the trial but stated that she wanted to publicly acknowledge that Michael Morin did not kill her father. She took full responsibility and agreed to her sentence. This shocking admission took everyone in the courtroom by surprise. However, Courtney's stance changed less than a year later. At Michael's trial in April 2007, where he faced the death penalty if convicted, Courtney did not repeat her previous statement that she was solely responsible for the crime and that Michael had nothing to do with it. Ultimately, Michael Morin was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison. In 2017, Courtney Schulhoff was sentenced to 40 years in prison. Although both men involved were punished, the exact details of the case remain unclear. It was confirmed that Stephen was killed with a baseball bat. But it is still unclear which of the two did the killing. Courtney did not confess to killing her father, but Michael did. Hello again, true crime fans, we've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Sidney Powell. Brenda Powell was born in 1969 in Saline, Agua, USA. She graduated from high school and then attended Akron University. After completing her studies, she began working as a pediatrician in the oncology department of her local children's hospital. For over 28 years, she has dedicated herself to helping sick children. Brenda oversees inpatient care and is known to her peers and hospital staff as a calm, quiet person who is exceptionally kind to both patients and their parents. In November 1996, Brenda, 27, married Stephen Powell and took his last name. They were introduced through a mutual friend who worked with her at the hospital. The couple enjoyed a happy life together for 23 years and welcomed 2 children. A daughter named Sydney and a son named Andrew. Since childhood, Sydney has been passionate about sports, especially football. Her family watched football together every Sunday, which helped strengthen their relationship. They also regularly visited the beach and Disneyland. As Sydney grew older, she and her mother, Brenda, began to spend more time together. While her father and brother watched football, they enjoyed shopping, which further strengthened their relationship. Sydney did well in high school, which helped her pass her exams and gain admission to Mount Union University, where she also received a scholarship. In college, she became friends with Lauren and a group of female students while living on campus. She participated in school events and was introduced to many different activities. Friends described Sydney as friendly and easygoing. Sydney's academic journey took an unexpected turn after her first year. Initially, everything seemed fine. She excelled in her classes and was praised by her teachers, ranking among the top students. Sydney began working part-time during the summer holidays to earn extra money. However, during her second year, Sydney faced significant challenges and decided to move off campus. Her friends were initially confused by this sudden decision but later learned that Sydney was struggling academically. Her grades were dropping. Additionally, Sydney began sleeping excessively, often around 16 hours a day. Sydney's friends thought she could handle it all because she was a smart and hardworking student who had previously done well in school. Unfortunately, Sydney struggled and ended up failing 3 out of 4 exams. Due to strict regulations, she received a notice of expulsion from the university, which shocked everyone. Sydney was worried and shared her concerns with her friends. Fortunately, they informed her that she could reapply for admission. At the beginning of 2020, Sydney resumed her studies, attending classes and sorority meetings. She happily told her friends that she had been readmitted to the university and was doing well. In early February, Sydney was notified that she had to leave the school permanently and that her expulsion would remain in effect. She was offered assistance with moving and packing. And the school planned to notify her parents of her situation to help cover her expenses. However, Sydney told the school administration that her family already knew and did not need to be contacted. This was not true, and she was afraid that her parents would find out about her expulsion. During this time, she told her parents that she was doing well in school and had good grades, and that she had even won a scholarship. Her parents trusted her and had no reason to doubt her. After being evicted from campus, Sydney left but did not return home before the end of February. Instead, she stayed with friends in various hotels, paying in cash to avoid being tracked and to keep her situation at the university a secret. Although she worked part-time to support herself, her earnings were insufficient. Sydney constantly searched for online opportunities to make money but could not find a full-time job that would provide adequate support. She continued to live in hotels or with friends, afraid to go home. She cut back on everything and often did not eat enough. Eventually, she decided to return home, claiming that the campus was closed for renovations. She told her parents that she would stay with them while she went to college and still work. Her parents believed her and thought everything was fine. Sydney has been lying to her mother by saying that she is fine. Recently, Brenda has noticed some strange changes in her daughter's behavior. She discovers that Sydney is spending more time at home and not going to school, which raises concerns. This information later comes to light because Sydney's entire family uses the Life 360 app, a mobile phone location tracking app on a map for safety, allowing family members to know where each other are. On February 25, 2020, Brenda received a notification from the app that Sydney had stayed home all day instead of coming to college as scheduled. This worried Brenda, who was concerned that something was wrong. She contacted her daughter to find out what was going on. Sydney replied that she had a week off because her teacher was absent. She mentioned that students were given assignments to complete at home and were participating in remote learning. However, Brenda began to doubt Sydney's story. She told her daughter that her explanations did not seem right and reminded her of the importance of good grades to maintain her scholarship and graduate, which would affect her future job opportunities. She also emphasized the importance of attending school regularly. Sydney then reassured her mother that everything was fine and that she should not worry. The deception continued. On March 2nd, Sydney texted her mother, saying she was going to school and would be back by 2:30 p.m. Instead, she spent time with a friend, watching TV, while lying about her college situation. During this time, the parents noticed that something was wrong. Their daughter did not receive the scholarship, so her father, Stephen, had to pay her tuition. He tried to send money through the payment gateway, but could not complete the transaction because he had lost access to his account. Initially, he suspected a technical problem and decided to wait. However, when Stephen logged in on March 3rd while working at a metallurgical plant, he was still unable to complete the transaction. He then asked his daughter about the problem. Sydney reassured him not to worry and promised that she would look into the matter and resolve it. Stephen realized he could not delay any longer as the deadline was near, and he needed to pay for his daughter's studies quickly. He decided to contact the university himself to resolve the situation. When he called, the staff checked their records and informed him that Sydney was not listed as a student, meaning her access had been revoked. Stephen was shocked and thought there must be some mistake. He requested they verify the information again, and they confirmed that Sydney had indeed been expelled. However, the university staff would not disclose the date of her expulsion, citing confidentiality rules. Stephen used a tracking app to locate Sydney, who was supposed to be in class. Instead, he discovered she was at home while he was at work. He wanted to go home to talk to her, but he feared she might track his movements and run away. To avoid this, he left his phone at work and headed home. Before leaving, he called Sydney to gather information, but she avoided giving clear answers. During the conversation, she admitted that she was struggling at university and didn't like it there. However, she continued to lie, not confessing that she had been expelled a long time ago. Instead, she claimed she had just not been attending classes. Stephen was troubled by his daughter's situation. He believed she was capable and had a bright future ahead, but he worried that her lack of commitment to attending classes could hinder her progress. He wanted to talk to her about the issue so they could find a solution together. On his way to work, Stephen called Brenda to inform her about their daughter's learning difficulties. Although Brenda suspected something was wrong, she hoped it was not true. Throughout the call, Stephen was concerned about Sydney's situation. However, Brenda reassured him. With a background in psychology, she had a skill for helping others and wanted to use her experience to support their daughter. She promised Stephen that she would take time off work, go home, and have a calm and open discussion with Sydney to ensure that they could all make the best decision together. Brenda then tried to contact the school but was unsuccessful. She left a voicemail asking for a call back and then went home. When Brenda reached her private entrance, she told her husband what had happened and went inside. Meanwhile, teachers Michelle and John received Brenda's message and called her back within the hour. At approximately 12:36 p.m., Brenda answered the phone and spoke calmly to the teachers. Everything seemed normal until Brenda started screaming into the phone, followed by a series of noises. Michelle and John, who were listening on speakerphone, were confused about what was happening but sensed that something was wrong. Michelle and John were worried about what had happened and tried calling Brenda again, but she did not answer. After several tries, a woman finally picked up at 12:40 p.m., but it wasn't Brenda. The teachers recognized Sydney's voice and asked to speak to her mother, but the call suddenly ended. This situation made Michelle and John suspicious. They decided to contact the local police to check on Brenda. Police officer Kenneth Diss, a friend of Brenda's family, heard the call and was extremely concerned about the alarming situation. He personally called Stephen to ask what was going on at their house, but Stephen could not provide any information because he was not home. After thinking for a moment, Stephen recalled that Sydney and Brenda were supposed to be at home discussing their study problems. He suspected there might have been a conflict between his wife and daughter. But he couldn't imagine the reality of the situation. Stephen then rushed home and called his daughter, Sydney, to find out what was going on. Sydney reassures him that everything is fine and the atmosphere seems calm. However, when Stephen tells her that the police are on their way, Sydney suddenly becomes hysterical. She begins to cry and reveals that a robber has broken into the house and attacked them. The call then ends abruptly. The police had already arrived at the house when Sydney dashed out, covered in blood, and screaming. She told the officers a shocking story about a robber who had broken in and attacked her mother. She said she heard glass breaking and that her mother told her to run, so she did. Sydney then hid in a courtyard, anxiously listening. She then found her mother lying in a pool of blood and she tried to help her, which is how she got blood on her. Inside the house, officers found Brenda lying face up in a room. She was badly injured, with a bloody cast iron skillet nearby and a kitchen knife on the floor. Despite the broken glass, officers began to doubt Sydney's story. Her story about a robber seemed very unbelievable. An ambulance arrived quickly and took Brenda to hospital, where she was taken to the intensive care unit. Sadly, 50-year-old Brenda Powell died shortly after arriving. Sydney was also examined by paramedics, but no serious injuries were found. She was sedated, her cuts were bandaged, and she was sent home. Forensic experts who examined Brenda's body were shocked by the brutality of the attack. She had suffered a severe blow to the back of the head, which caused her scalp to detach from her skull. Additionally, she had numerous stab wounds, estimated to be between 20 and 30, mostly concentrated on her neck. There were also multiple bruises and cuts on her arms, suggesting she had tried to defend herself. A preliminary review of the situation led police to believe that Sydney's account of events was fabricated. Although Sydney was covered in blood and had several smaller cuts on her arms, They were significantly less severe than her mother's injuries. It was evident that the robbery had been staged, as nothing was taken from the house. Sydney's actions raised several questions. After her mother told her to leave the house, why didn't she run to the neighbors for help or call 911? Instead, she waited in the yard and later went back into the house without any apparent fear. None of the neighbors reported seeing a robber. The blood found on Sydney was tested and matched her mother's, including traces on the broken glass. Police sent the knife, believed to be the murder weapon, and the frying pan for analysis. Brenda's blood was found on these items, and no fingerprints or other DNA were found at the scene. It appears that Sydney injured herself when she stabbed her mother. Sydney Powell was then taken to the police station for questioning. After the initial panic subsided, she refused to answer any questions. By this time, police investigating the attack had learned about recent events in Sydney's university life. They discovered that she had been expelled a month earlier and had lied to her family about her situation, staying with friends in hotels instead. She was so afraid of disappointing those around her that she had lied not only to her parents but also to her classmates and others. Police believed that Sydney was so afraid of telling the truth that she decided to kill her mother when her mother started to suspect something was wrong. Despite this, Sydney chose to remain silent. 19-year-old Sydney Powell was arrested and charged with murdering Brenda. She also faced charges for causing serious injury and for tampering with evidence to mislead the investigation. Due to her mental health issues, she was unable to admit or deny her guilt. Her lawyer argued that she was insane, stating that Sydney had struggled with serious mental health problems since childhood. At the time of the offense, Sydney may have been experiencing a mental health crisis that affected her perception of her actions. Sydney faced several mental health issues that may have contributed to the violent incident, which led police to request a psychiatric evaluation. During the examination, Sydney spoke about her memories of that day but could only recall bits and pieces. She remembered sitting in the basement, anxious about her parents coming home after her father found out about her struggles. She also remembers her mother coming home and their conversation starting, when her mother comforted her and asked what happened at school. She wished her mother would leave her alone. Then she heard the sound of glass breaking, and then she couldn't remember anything else about what happened. Sydney informed her doctor that she had been experiencing hallucinations since she was 11 years old. She had always been very anxious, responsible, and self-critical, setting extremely high academic standards for herself. At times her anxiety became so intense that it affected her ability to concentrate on tests, leading to multiple psychological evaluations. After extensive evaluation and discussion with Sydney, the psychiatrist diagnosed her with acute post-traumatic stress disorder, schizoaffective disorder, and depression. Sydney reported that she had recurring nightmares of her mother covered in blood. The lack of a clear motive for the murder led the psychiatrist to determine that Sydney was insane at the time of the incident. Another doctor who worked with Sydney for at least 3 to 6 months before the crime noted that her mental health had deteriorated significantly. She started losing touch with reality and began failing her exams, which ultimately led to her expulsion from university. Her condition was worsened by extreme self-criticism. She couldn't accept that she had failed. Sydney was also afraid to confess her struggles to her parents. However, the truth eventually came out, causing her immense stress. This culminated in a psychotic breakdown that resulted in her mother's murder. After her arrest, Sydney's bail was initially set at $250,000 but was later raised to $500,000. One of her relatives posted bail, allowing her to await her trial outside of custody. During this time, she received treatment for her mental health issues and felt significantly better by the time the hearings began. Sydney eventually regained her composure. After Sydney saw Brenda talking to college teachers, she knew that her mother would soon hear the truth from them. In a psychotic state, she attacked her mother. Teachers at the college heard the beginning of the attack. During the trial, her friends and relatives confirmed that they did not notice any significant changes in her behavior leading up to the crime. Although she was upset about being expelled, she was generally cheerful and sociable. The only noticeable difference was that she began sleeping more. The defense acknowledged that Sydney killed her mother but maintained that she was insane at the time. However, many experts disagreed with the psychiatrist's diagnosis. What everyone agreed on was that she suffered from borderline personality disorder, which is characterized by stubbornness, mood swings, and self-destructive behavior. In addition, signs of hallucinations were reported by Sydney to a psychiatrist when she was 11. There was no evidence in the medical records to support Sydney's claims, which undermined the defense's strategy. Several former friends mentioned that Sydney had exhibited unusual behavior even during her school years. One teacher recalled when Sydney was so nervous that she couldn't read anything on a test. However, teacher didn't realize that Sydney's anxiety could indicate mental health issues, so teacher didn't tell anyone. This type of anxiety continued into college, which may have contributed to Sydney failing her exams and eventually being expelled. While awaiting trial, Sydney lived with her grandmother and was prescribed medication to treat her mental health issues. The medication list and dosage were changed several times to find the most effective combination. Sydney's health improved significantly, and she shared any positive changes with her doctor. Her father also noticed the improvement and admitted that Sydney had a strong bond with her mother and loved her deeply. He believed that if Sydney had been in a healthy state of mind, she would never have harmed her mother. Throughout the trial, Sydney cried continuously and she expressed remorse for her actions. On September 18, 2023, the jury deliberated. Sydney Powell was found guilty on all counts. Sydney was sentenced to life in prison but will be eligible for parole after 15 years. Sydney and her attorney were unhappy with the sentence and planned to appeal the court's decision. Hello again, true crime fans, we've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Christopher Sutton. On Sunday, August 22, 2004, the Sutton family experienced a devastating tragedy following Susan's 57th birthday celebration. The celebration included Susan, her husband John, their son Christopher, his girlfriend Juliet, and family friend Teddy Montoda. After the party, Susan and John went to bed in separate rooms at their home in the upscale Coral Gables neighborhood near Miami, Florida. One night, a tragic event occurred. Susan usually slept in a separate room because her husband, John, snored loudly. While they were sleeping, a car stopped about 4 blocks away from their house. A man dressed in black was approaching their house with the intention of killing Susan and John. The attacker was armed with a 9mm Glock pistol and broke into Susan's house. He first went to John's bedroom and shot him twice in the head. He then moved to the room where Susan was sleeping, shot her 6 times, and left. The police were notified of the incident. Police and ambulances were dispatched to the scene shortly afterwards. Unfortunately, doctors determined that Susan, 57, had died. John was still alive but had suffered serious injuries and had lost a lot of blood. He was taken to hospital, where paramedics worked frantically to save him, although his chances of survival were slim. Before being taken to hospital, John said that he could not see the shooter in the dark and did not know who it was. Forensic experts began examining the crime scene, while police questioned neighbors and searched for surveillance cameras. Although no cameras were found, but neighbors reported seeing a suspicious man dressed in dark clothing running away from the house. There were no signs of forced entry. The killer had accessed the home through the sliding glass doors. The house was intact, with no money or jewelry taken, indicating to police that this was not a robbery. The attack was clearly targeted at killing Susan and John. But the motive behind the murder remains unknown. Melissa Sutton was 18 years old when her parents were attacked. As a freshman living on her own, she couldn't attend the celebration at their house. She was devastated to learn about her mother's death. Overwhelmed with grief, she went to see her father in the hospital. She described him as looking very unwell. John had miraculously survived 2 gunshot wounds to the head, leaving doctors astonished that he was still alive, although he remained in serious condition. When John woke up in intensive care, he realized he was blind. Additionally, he was experiencing severe shock. He felt unsafe in the hospital, constantly fearing that the killer might return. This left John feeling endangered. He was eager to leave the hospital and find a safe place to hide. His fears were taken seriously, so a guard was assigned to his room, and police patrolled the area around the clock. Due to the severity of his injuries, John was also unable to hear anything. He didn't hear the shots fired at his wife and was unaware of what happened to Susan. As he slowly started to recover, he asked Melissa how his wife was. She did not answer because the police had advised her not to say anything that might upset John further. He later found out that his wife had been murdered by her attacker. The news was a huge shock to him. Susan's death was a huge loss for the whole family. She had devoted her life to being a loving mother. Susan spent many years as an intensive care nurse, a respected profession in the United States. Her career ended in the late 1970s when she decided to stay at home with her husband, John, after the birth of their first child, Christopher. They made this choice because Susan had been unable to conceive for 7 years, at which point they decided to adopt a daughter, Melissa. The police discovered that John had built a successful business and may have had enemies. They also learned that he had received previous threats of violence. The police investigated everyone who had had animosity toward John and Susan, but they all had solid alibis. While the police searched the crime scene for evidence, they discovered that Susan's purse, jewelry belonging to her or her husband, were still intact. Although these items were visible, the police planned to interview John, but he had difficulty communicating. However, he was able to provide some useful information. Although he could not identify the shooter, he recalled seeing a dark figure at the door. The attacker may have been dressed all in black or may have been African American. John could not be certain in the darkness. Unfortunately, this information was not useful to the police. The police decided to speak with Teddy, a family friend who was at the party before the shooting. They visited his house for an interview. Teddy explained that he was on the phone with Susan at the exact moment the shooting happened. He heard a gunshot, followed by silence. Feeling frightened, he called the police, got into his car, and rushed to the Susan family's home, arriving just after the police. Teddy was very shaken by the attack on Susan. However, the police found his account unusual. They questioned why he was still talking to Susan when everyone else had already left the party, leading them to suspect an affair. Teddy clarified that he was not just a family friend but also a business partner. He claimed that they were discussing an urgent business matter and that he frequently communicated with both John and Susan to handle various issues, so he didn't find his late conversation with Susan abnormal. During the conversation, Teddy told the police that the shooters were professional and trained shooters. The police found this information interesting and took Teddy's gun for testing. Teddy was also called into the station for a lie detector test. The police believed he was hiding something and continued to question him. Teddy eventually confessed that he was in a romantic relationship with Susan. The police have often seen love triangles that can lead people to commit terrible acts. However, Teddy's gun did not match the weapon used in the attack and his phone was tracked to a location far from the crime scene at the time of the shooting. Teddy denied any involvement in the attack on John and Susan. Although his lie detector test was deemed inconclusive, It was suggested that his anxiety stemmed from trying to keep his affair with Susan a secret to avoid damaging his relationship with his friend John. John had a strong and trusting relationship with Teddy. Shortly before the incident, John and Teddy received one of the largest payouts in their law firm's history, over $1 million, and they celebrated this occasion extravagantly. Teddy was ruled out as a suspect, and the police decided to investigate other family members instead. An examination revealed that John could not have physically inflicted the shot on himself, so he was not considered a suspect. Their daughter Melissa has a solid alibi because she was in another city and also passed a lie detector test. The police then investigated Christopher Sutton. He had a girlfriend named Juliet. They had attended a family party together. Christopher quickly claimed that he and Juliet had gone to the movies the night before and provided their tickets as evidence. Juliet confirmed his story. The police then requested the cinema's surveillance camera footage, confirming that they had indeed gone to the cinema that night and confirming their alibi. After leaving the hospital, John moved in with Christopher so he could care for him for a while. However, disturbing evidence was discovered that Christopher actually wanted to kill his parents. He even threatened to kill his mother during a fight. Christopher became the prime suspect in the case. Additionally, Christopher had a criminal record that included vandalizing a teacher's home. When Christopher was 16, his parents, John and Susan, decided to send him to a reform school. Christopher was aggressive and had trouble controlling his anger, which made it difficult for him to socialize with other teenagers. He changed schools at least 6 times. He often skipped school. John would drop him off at the main entrance, walk to the door, but then Christopher would sneak out through another exit and go do his own thing. However, his absences were not his biggest problem. He also got involved in some criminal activities. One day, he and a group of friends broke into a teacher's house, causing damage and graffiti. As a result, Christopher was arrested and the teacher filed a lawsuit against him. The damage was estimated to be in excess of $50,000, and his parents had to pay it. Christopher's family had no financial problems and could easily pay the fine. However, his family was frustrated with their son's out-of-control behavior and did not know how to handle him. Christopher was a difficult teenager who had no respect for adult authority. His rebellion began with his love of piercings and tattoos, which his parents strongly disapproved of. Despite their efforts, they were unable to change his behavior, which led to more problems. One day, Christopher pointed an unloaded rifle at his mother and sister, threatening to kill them. Shortly before Christopher's 16th birthday, Susan discovered a note in his room that outlined a plan to kill his parents to inherit their money. Susan informed John about the note, and they confronted Christopher, who dismissed it as a joke. However, when his parents saw the note, they became frightened. From that point on, they were afraid to be alone with their son in the house. They even sought legal help, which led to a court-ordered rehabilitation program. Staff from a specialist organization forcibly transferred Christopher to a rehabilitation facility on the island of Samoa called Paradise Bay. It is a strict school for troubled youth. In 1998, when Christopher first arrived at this institution, his behavior became extremely aggressive, leading to him being restrained. Following this, he was taken to a remote camp in the mountains, where he was left tied up. The staff aimed to re-educate him through these strict measures. Typically, such severe discipline was effective and helped even the most challenging cases to improve. After spending a year in a behavior correction facility, Christopher sent his parents an emotional video message. In it, he described the violence he experienced there and accused his parents of not loving him for sending him to such a place. Upon hearing this, his parents visited institutions for troubled teenagers in Samoa but found nothing wrong. As a result, they did not believe Christopher's claims. They knew about the strict rules in place and believed they were intended to benefit troubled teens. Furthermore, Christopher was there under a court order, so his parents could not take him away. However, Christopher still hoped to leave the facility when he turned 18. John then received a court order stating that Christopher would remain in custody. The program at Paradise Bay was extended for another year, which surprised Christopher. But he had no choice but to remain at the facility. In 2000, Paradise Bay was closed after management faced multiple allegations of youth mistreatment. Christopher finally returned home on his 19th birthday, after 30 months at Paradise Bay. This situation raised concerns for the police, as his anger at being mistreated could be considered a motive for murder. After enduring such torture, Christopher may have felt the urge to take revenge on his parents. However, after returning from Paradise Bay, he changed. Christopher always showed that he had become a caring and calm son, especially in how he took care of his father following an incident. John could not believe that his son could be involved in the case, believing that Christopher had changed. However, the police suspected that Christopher had orchestrated the double murder, which was only partially successful because his father survived. Although Christopher had an alibi, he may have hired someone else to carry out the crime. The police needed to gather evidence to support their suspicions. So they brought him in for a second interview. In this conversation, Christopher reveals details that have not been revealed to the public and remain confidential. Christopher said he went to the scene of the incident. He saw the shooter walking down the hallway, and his mother Susan had been shot 6 times, information that was later confirmed during the investigation. Christopher also recounted the order in which the shots were fired and other key details. While Christopher appears distraught and cries over his mother's death, the police believe he is lying and is actually a criminal. However, Christopher was supported by his girlfriend Juliet, who also seemed shocked by the incident. She said she herself had been in shock for a long time, following the news of the shooting. Juliet met Christopher when she was 17, and he was 19, having just returned from a school for troubled youth. She described him as kind, polite and courteous, and he made a strong positive impression on her. He treated her like a true gentleman. So she could never imagine that he could commit murder. Juliet said that his parents welcomed her into their family. His mother, Susan, taught her how to apply makeup and helped her develop her dressing style. His father, John, also supported her by giving her a job at his law firm. The couple's parents supported them financially without expecting anything in return. They were happy to see the couple together. When police first encountered Christopher at the crime scene, it was shortly after he had been informed of the incident. He appeared to be very upset, and one officer noticed tears on his face. However, his initial statement to police during questioning shattered the impression of sadness. He quickly explained that he and Juliet had had dinner with their parents but left at around 9 p.m. to go to the movies. He then gave the police their movie tickets. Instead of asking how his parents were doing, he focused on justifying his actions and emphasized his alibi before any charges were brought. Police carefully reviewed surveillance footage from the cinema, which showed Christopher leaving after the movie around midnight. They noticed he immediately used his mobile phone to make a call, arousing curiosity about who he was contacting. The police quickly checked all his calls. Police later determined that Christopher had contacted a man named Garrett Kopp 31 times in the days leading up to the murder, which raised suspicions. Garrett, a police officer with a criminal record, had come to the attention of police. They suspected he might be involved in the crime. The case drew attention to Garrett's troubled past, including multiple arrests, adding to police suspicions. Police began to consider Garrett as a potential suspect. At the time of the case, he was out on bail. When police examined the weapon used in the murder, they found it to be very similar to Garrett's Glock, so he was taken to the station for questioning. Garrett had a tense conversation with the police and later admitted to attacking John and Susan. However, Garrett insisted that he did not act on his own. He said that Christopher had threatened to kill him and his son if he did not comply. Garrett insisted that the idea for the attack was entirely Christopher's. He also said that Christopher had given him the gun and had left the door unlocked, allowing him easy access to the house. The police arrested Garrett and charged him with murder, but his testimony was not enough to keep Christopher in custody. Juliet was questioned by police who believed she had more information than she was revealing. Despite their efforts, she denied any involvement and insisted on her innocence for several hours. The interrogation lasted 13 hours in total, but the police did not record it. Later, Juliet alleged that police had threatened her with arrest to force a confession and acted provocatively during the questioning. However, she eventually admitted that Christopher felt a strong resentment towards his parents for placing him in a facility for troubled teenagers. Recently, his parents tried to push him to get a job and start covering his own costs, which he found unacceptable, and this led to family conflicts. During questioning, Juliet revealed that Christopher had been planning revenge on his parents for years. He often spoke about the inheritance and how they could live without worries if he could take everything his parents had earned. However, she didn't take his threats seriously. The police had gathered enough evidence to obtain an arrest warrant for Christopher Sutton. However, by that time, he had disappeared. This was a crucial moment for the police, as they feared that Christopher might return to harm John. Fortunately, the police were able to locate and arrest Christopher, charging him with the murder of his mother and attempted murder of his father. Garrett Kopp and Christopher Sutton were eventually tried separately, and both faced the death penalty. Christopher, however, maintained that he had no role in planning the crime. The defense argued that the police were unfair, claiming that the police pressured Juliet, which influenced her testimony. After Garrett learned that he could face the death penalty, Garrett decided to cooperate with the prosecution by pleading guilty to a lesser charge, which was in his favor. He was then sentenced to 30 years in prison. The prosecution's case took a turn when Juliet appeared in court to testify. She revealed that Christopher had often expressed anger at his parents for not giving him money, even saying that they deserved to die for their actions. The defense argued that much of Juliet's testimony was given under police pressure and should be excluded from the case. However, the judge denied this request. In court, Juliet maintained that she had been truthful during her interrogation with the police. She stated that she viewed Christopher's anger as mere frustration and never believed he would go on to commit such serious crimes. After Juliet's testimony, John, the surviving father, shared his thoughts. After hearing all the witness testimony, John believed that Christopher was capable of committing the crime. John noted that even after leaving the hospital, Christopher continued to try to manage the family's finances, which led him to believe that Christopher was involved in the crime. When it was Christopher's turn to speak, he accused Garrett of attacking their parents due to his drug addiction. Christopher highlighted several moments when Garrett was out of control due to drugs, claiming that during those times he was dangerous and capable of committing any crime. Christopher also mentioned that he kept drugs in Susan's bedroom closet. The Garrett might have entered the house to steal illegal drugs. However, the prosecutor argued that the scene did not appear to be a burglary, everything was intact, even the money and jewelry were intact. If it was a burglary, Garrett would have taken valuables. In his defense, Christopher claimed that he had changed and overcome the anger, resentment, and disappointment he felt towards his parents for sending him to a special school. He believed that he had changed for the better. After extensive deliberation, the jury found Christopher Sutton guilty of first-degree murder and attempted murder. Christopher was shocked by the verdict because he was sure that he would be acquitted. Christopher received 3 life sentences without the possibility of parole. Currently, survivor John Sutton is putting in great effort to regain his eyesight. He has formed a new relationship and started a family, and at 70 years old, he continues to practice law. Hello again, true crime fans. we've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Ellie Nessler. In the small town of Jamestown, California, Daniel Mark Driver was on trial for child abuse. One of Daniel's victims was William Nelair, a defenseless child. William's mother, Ellie, felt that the justice system had failed to protect her son, so Ellie took matters into her own hands with a gun. The case sparked widespread debate, with some people fully supporting Ellie, while others criticized her actions. Ultimately, the discussion surrounding the case attracted national attention. Jamestown was a small, quiet town with a population of about 3,500 at the time of the incident. Ellie was the eldest of 3 daughters. Her parents were hardworking miners who taught Ellie the importance of self-reliance from a young age. As a result, she grew up to be strong and independent. During her teenage years, Ellie began to help her family by looking for work. It was a tough economic time. She took on various jobs to supplement her income. She also helped her parents by taking care of her younger siblings. When Ellie turned 20, she fell in love with a guy she met, and they quickly entered a romantic relationship. Soon after, they got married, but their marriage ended in divorce shortly thereafter. Her next partner was Bill, who worked as a miner. Additionally, Bill operated construction equipment, allowing him to earn a good income. They married in 1982 and soon welcomed a son named William. Bill grew up in an area that was once the center of the gold rush. As a child, he had listened to stories of old men panning for gold in the river, which inspired him to seek their adventure, even though the land was largely depleted by then. In search of better fortune, Bill and his family traveled to Liberia, West Africa, during the gold rush. While Bill was prospecting for gold, Ellie gave birth to their daughter, Rebecca. Unfortunately, Rebecca's early years were not peaceful. Suddenly, shortly after her birth, civil war broke out in Liberia. As a result, Ellie and the children returned to Jamestown, while Bill remained in West Africa, determined to make his fortune mining gold. During this time, Ellie faced numerous challenges in the United States. She received no support from Bill, and although she was a strong and independent woman, managing a household and caring for 2 young children proved to be very difficult for her. They relied on government assistance and occasional jobs that Ellie managed to find. During this period, she received support from her family and the church, which she attended regularly with her children and sister. Her mother often advised her to be self-reliant but also to carry a gun in her handbag for protection. Ellie took this lesson to heart. Despite her delicate appearance, she was always prepared to defend herself and, if needed, to take the initiative in a confrontation. This aspect of her character would later lead to tragic consequences. Ellie is very close to her children and does not let them go far. This protectiveness stems from her own traumatic experience as a child, when she was molested by an adult man. After she confided in her mother reacted violently and threatened him to leave town. This incident left Ellie with lasting psychological scars that she has struggled with throughout her life. She fears that her children may face similar dangers. When her son William went to summer camp away from home, she felt very anxious and scared. Despite her worries, William kept asking his mother to let him go to the summer camp organized by the church. Ellie was very anxious about letting her son spend time with others without her supervision. She hadn't even allowed him to sleep over at friends' houses. Eventually, her sister Jenna reassured her, explaining that she knew the camp organizers well and described them as respectable and good people. After thinking it over, Ellie finally agreed to let her son go, hoping he would enjoy himself. William spent 3 weeks at a church-run tent camp. After returning from the summer camp, Ellie noticed a change in William's behavior. William became aggressive, often sad, and stopped communicating. Ellie sensed that something was bothering him. Despite her and her family's efforts to find out what was happening at the camp, William refused to discuss it with adults. He insisted on being treated like an adult and wanted them to stop asking him questions. Younger sister Rebecca and his mother thought he was trying to imitate the older teenagers he had met at the camp. When the new school year started a few weeks later, everyone thought William was settling in well with his friends. However, when he returned to class, things did not improve. He began to withdraw from his family and became more aggressive with his classmates, rarely interacting with others. His anger often became uncontrollable, and these incidents had increased since he had been at the camp. Ellie was confused by William's changes, and it took her over a year to discover the reason behind them. Unfortunately, the truth behind it was quite heartbreaking. Daniel Mark Driver, a 30-year-old man who attended the same church as Ellie and her children, had recently moved in with his mother, who lived nearby. He was considered a good man and an active member of the church, known for his community involvement and willingness to help other parishioners. He always carried a Bible with him and could easily recite passages from it. Daniel took on the role of kitchen staff at the summer camp and also helped supervise the children, who always spoke positively of him. He is a natural psychologist. According to his parents, Daniel can help solve any difficult situation. Students often come to him to confide in him when they are in trouble. Many boys who do not have fathers consider Daniel as a father figure. With his persuasive skills, he can talk to any teenager. William experienced a significant change in his relationship with Daniel. William used to enjoy spending time with Daniel and interacting with him. But after returning from summer camp, William became noticeably anxious even during casual encounters. During this time, William often argued with his sister Rebecca, seemingly starting conflicts for no reason, and William also began to defy his mother. He had never argued with Ellie before, but now he became increasingly defiant. Occasionally, William's Aunt Jen, who was very close to the family, would take William to her home for the weekend. This gave his mother a break. About 9 months after the camp, Jen took William to her home for a weekend. During his stay, he had the opportunity to spend time with his cousins. Each time, Jen tried to discuss the major changes in his behavior, but William was quiet and avoided answering her questions. However, he later confided in her a secret, insisting that she not tell anyone, not even his mother. Jen agreed to keep it a secret. 7-year-old William shared his experience while he was at summer camp. Daniel began to behave inappropriately towards him. One day, the Daniel lured William into the woods with the promise of showing him frogs and other animals. However, as they went deeper into the woods, the Daniel began to abuse him. This abuse continued regularly, even after the summer camp ended. The boy was afraid to go to church and tried to avoid the Daniel as much as possible. The abuse began when William was 6 years old, and during this time, the Daniel threatened him, saying that he would harm William and his family if he revealed what was happening. Fearing danger to his loved ones, William kept quiet, and the abuse continued for many months. After hearing the story, Jen felt she had to talk to Ellie. She apologized to William for revealing his secret, but felt the need to take action against the rapist and put an end to his actions. Jen first spoke to her sister Ellie about what had happened to William. Ellie was shocked and blamed herself for exposing her child to such a problem. From the beginning, her maternal instincts warned her that William should not attend the camp. However, she succumbed to the pressure, leading to the outcome she feared and experienced. William worried that the man might come back and act on his threat if he found out that William had told anyone about the incident. The boy became increasingly anxious and fearful. He often came home from school in tears, telling his mother that he had seen Daniel's car in the distance. The panic attacks became more frequent, and he began to feel paranoid. He tried his best to cope, but the situation was still not good. Ellie then reported the molestation involving their son to the police. Police checked Daniel's record in a national database, discovering a worrying history of crimes involving children. In 1984, he was charged with indecent exposure to 5 boys in the San Jose area. Although he was arrested, his church community sent letters of support to him before the trial. With no solid evidence other than the boys' testimony, the judge ultimately decided to give Daniel probation instead of a prison sentence, allowing him to escape the consequences of his actions. This leniency allowed him to continue his harmful actions. Daniel then decided to move away and start over. He moved closer to his mother, where no one knew about his past crimes. Daniel also started attending church and developed a healthy relationship with a woman who had a young son. He became more involved with the children, working with them, giving them advice, and eventually got a job at a church summer camp, where he was often around children. However, the woman began to notice Daniel's unusual behavior towards her child and started to pay closer attention. She eventually asked her son if Daniel had ever bothered him, but the boy appeared confused and insisted that nothing inappropriate had happened. The mother, doubting her son's honesty and fearing he was too scared to speak up, did not dismiss her concerns. She continued to monitor Daniel's behavior. A few months later, she caught Daniel molesting her son. She then contacted a friend who was the district attorney. A background check revealed that Daniel had served 5 months in 1983 for child abuse. Concerns about him grew when William's case occurred, prompting the boy's mother, Ellie, to contact the police. At that point, the police investigated Daniel more closely and gathered evidence from new victims of his molestation. After Ellie reported the incident, the police stepped up their efforts to prevent similar crimes by Daniel. Police began questioning all the families who had come into contact with Daniel, including children who had attended the camp. Many of them reported similar experiences, which helped police understand the tactics Daniel used. He repeatedly targeted boys, gaining their trust while threatening to kill them and their families if they spoke out, which proved effective. Police identified 5 new victims in the area, including William. In 1983, charges were filed, but they were unable to arrest Daniel because he had been out of town for an extended period of time. At the time, it was difficult to track his whereabouts due to the lack of cell phones, GPS, and other tracking technology. Police suspected that he had learned of the investigation and had gone into hiding. Both Daniel and his car were placed on the wanted list, and his photo was widely circulated in the press. However, despite these efforts, it took several years to find him. Meanwhile, William's depression and aggressive behavior continued. He frequently got into fights at school, did poorly in school, and became a bully. As a result, William was expelled from several schools and transferred several times. Ellie believes her son's behavior stems from past violence that has deeply affected him. She sought help for her son, taking him to numerous doctors and psychologists in hopes of improving his situation, but nothing seemed to work. In 1993, police finally caught up with Daniel at a store in Palo Alto, California, for shoplifting. After confessing to the theft, Daniel faced charges not only for shoplifting but also for child abuse. Even after Daniel was arrested and awaiting trial, William continued to feel afraid. He struggled to accept that he would have to face his abuser in court. William would have to testify against him, but the thought of it filled him with dread. William was so anxious that the mere mention of the trial made him feel sick. In desperation, Ellie approached the prosecutor to request special arrangements for her son's testimony. She hoped William could testify without Daniel present to spare him serious emotional distress. Unfortunately, the current rules required William to appear before a jury. To address this situation, the only solution was to install cameras so that William could provide testimony from another room. He would be recorded, and the video would be shown in court. Unfortunately, the small community lacked the funds to set this up. As a result, William had to appear in court like the other boys who had also been victimized by Daniel. The trial was challenging due to the presence of many emotionally and physically traumatized children. The boys who had already testified had experienced significant distress, but they managed to get through it. On April 2, 1993, 11-year-old William was one of the last witnesses to take the stand. Ellie tried to prepare him for his meeting with Daniel the criminal as best she could. However, when the car carrying William and his relatives arrived at the courthouse, William did not want to leave. He began to have a panic attack and vomited violently. Ellie reassured him that he needed to testify because testifying was the only way to ensure that a dangerous person would be locked up and unable to harm anyone else. William understood the importance of his testimony, but his fear made it difficult for him to calm down. Ellie, William, and the aunts waited outside the courthouse to be called to testify. During this time, they tried to comfort William and help him calm down. Suddenly, a van arrived at the courthouse and Daniel was taken out. When William saw Daniel, he felt nauseous again. Ellie stared at Daniel as he walked through the courthouse yard. She later remembered that Daniel just smirked and walked past. She felt a burning hatred for this man. As they left the building, Daniel's ex-girlfriend and her son, who was also a victim, testified against him. The woman told Ellie that things were not going well. She noted that the children were nervous and confused in their testimony. Daniel took advantage of this by highlighting inconsistencies in their testimony. He continued to put the children in difficult situations, asking distressing questions that only made them more confused. They became increasingly upset, some of them crying. This makes Ellie worried about William. Ellie fears that the situation could affect the trial, potentially allowing a dangerous criminal to escape justice and return to his former criminal ways. At that moment, Ellie Nessler suddenly realizes that she must serve justice, and Daniel must be stopped forever. Court in this county lack modern security features like metal detectors. It is easy to carry guns inside. And many people in the community, including Jen, carry weapons for self-defense. While on the street, Ellie reached into her purse and quietly pulled out a gun. She hid the weapon as they entered the courtroom, where Ellie shot Daniel 6 times. 5 of the bullets hit him in the back of the head and neck, killing him instantly. People in the courtroom panicked and fled, and police rushed in with loaded guns. Jen stepped in front of her sister, causing Ellie to throw the gun to the ground and raise her hands in surrender. She was then arrested. The shocking story of a mother staging a lynching during a court hearing quickly made national headlines. Within a week, every major media outlet had covered the incident, sparking widespread debate about the lynching. Many saw Ellie as a hero, receiving overwhelming support from local residents, especially those affected by the event. 2 local banks even set up defense funds that the community could contribute to for Ellie, leading to a rush of donations from her supporters. Items such as T-shirts that read "Good shot, Ellie" became popular and which sold well. Similar stickers could be found on cars all over the country. Despite this, Ellie couldn't be celebrated as a national hero for her actions. She was arrested and had a bail set at $500,000. This amount was provided by a guarantor from Seaman, allowing her to return home before the hearings and await trial in her own community. However, not everyone agreed with her decision, and she faced criticism from some members of society who accused her of taking the law into her own hands. Still, the majority, including the local community, viewed her as a protector of her child. Police uncovered additional details about Ellie's situation. They found that she had been under the influence of illegal drugs when she fired her weapon in the courthouse. Ellie claimed she used these substances to give herself the courage needed to endure the stressful courtroom hearings. In October 1993, she received a diagnosis of breast cancer, with doctors estimating she only had 5 years to live. Initially found guilty of manslaughter, Ellie was sentenced to 10 years in prison. However, Her conviction was later overturned due to the jury's misconduct. She then reached a plea deal with the prosecution, admitting guilt to manslaughter, and ultimately served 3 years in prison before her release. William then moved in with his Aunt Jen. After 2 years, he was finally able to communicate with Ellie, who was still serving her sentence in prison. Ellie expressed her feelings. She deeply regretted having to take someone's life, which was never her intention. However, she felt that the justice system would not be able to protect her son and other children from a dangerous criminal. The only reason she pulled the trigger was the fear that Daniel would be released again. William's life was ruined at a key moment in his growing up. He was molested and then dragged through the courts. The William became a hooligan, got involved with bad company, and lost his way. As a result, he had frequent encounters with the law, with courts and prison becoming a regular part of his life. He was first charged with a crime at the age of 14. He was incarcerated 18 times between 1999 and 2004 for various crimes. His criminal record was extensive, including charges of robbery, assault, illegal possession of a weapon, and drug-related offenses. In 2004, when he turned 23, William was living freely, had several tattoos, and resided in his family's house. He didn't have a permanent job, so, similar to his mother in her younger days, he was searching for temporary work for short periods. However, while Ellie had to do this out of necessity due to the economic crisis, for William, it was a result of his involvement in criminal activities. In 2004, he also took a part-time job with his friend David, helping to clean his house during construction and repairs. David had become disabled from working in the oil fields. In June, a dispute arose when tools went missing from the construction site, with both sides blaming each other. When the police arrived, William attacked David and beat him. Due to this incident, along with the previous charges, he was sentenced to 60 days in prison but was released after only 30 days. On July 26, 2004, just an hour after his release, he returned to his workplace. David attempted to escape but was unable to due to his disability. William then attacked David, kicking him in the head several times. As a result, David lost consciousness and died in hospital the following day. William fled the scene but was arrested a few days later and charged with first-degree murder. In June 2005, William Nessler was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Rebecca was the only one to escape the tragic fate and now lives a normal life with her family and children, often reflecting on the absence of her mother and brother during important moments. She deeply misses her brother William, who always looked out for her. Rebecca believes that William would not have ended up in prison if their mother had not shot Daniel. This tragic event caused a series of unfortunate events that made their lives worse. Despite this, she does not resent her mother. She understands that her mother was confused and made a hasty decision. In the end, Rebecca feels that her mother's actions prevented many boys from facing the same fate. Ellie's life ended in tragedy. In addition to battling breast cancer, she faced legal troubles. She became involved in distributing illegal drugs. In 2002, she bought materials for making drugs from a police informant. Initially, Ellie provided some drugs to the informant, but 5 days later, when she returned to collect the pills, she was arrested after the informant reported her. Ellie confessed to her crimes and was sentenced to 6 years in prison, but she only served 4 years. She was released in 2006, but sadly, Ellie Nessler passed away from breast cancer on December 26, 2008, at the age of 56. When Ellie died, William asked to be released from prison to say goodbye to his mother. But his request was denied. 2 years later, in 2010, Rebecca and a reporter visited her brother in prison. They spoke for about 2.5 hours. During the conversation, William was very reflective, reviewing everything that had happened in his life. He did not try to justify his actions or blame anyone else. He noted that he felt he had been pushed down a path of self-destruction at the age of 6, a burden he would always carry. William emphasized how public opinion affected him, especially when the case of Daniel, a rapist who was murdered in court, was heavily covered by the media. The attention affected him. The whole community knew that William was also a victim, sexually abused at the age of 6. People discussed his past, which made him feel ashamed. He doesn't want this attention, but it's hard for him to escape it. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Pamela Buchbinder. Jacob Nolan was born in 1991 into a wealthy family in Miami, Florida. As the third child in the family, he received a lot of love from his parents. They realized that he was different from his peers. However, at the age of 5, Jacob was diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. When Jacob turned 15, his family noticed that he was experiencing significant mood swings. Despite this, he was doing well in school. He created an educational smartphone app and won a competition in Miami. However, a month later, Jacob couldn't get out of bed, had no motivation to do anything, even stand up. They finally brought him to a doctor, who diagnosed him with depression and anxiety. At 17, Jacob expressed that he no longer wanted to live. His parents noticed his unstable behavior and mental state, prompting them to take him to a hospital, where he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. This serious mental illness involves extreme mood swings, ranging from depression to emotional outbursts. Those affected feel trapped in their own thoughts. After finishing high school, Jacob enrolled in college while continuing his treatment. Throughout this time, he saw various psychiatrists who prescribed increasingly stronger medications. From the ages of 17 to 20, Jacob underwent numerous treatment courses, took 5 to 6 pills daily, and tried around 30 different medications, yet none seemed to help. By 2012, at 21 years old, Jacob was still deteriorating. His parents were deeply concerned and unsure of what steps to take next. Then, one day, a relative from New York, Pamela Buchbinder, called with an offer of help. Jacob's parents were relieved, thinking they had gotten help. However, they had no idea of the challenges that were about to come to their family. Pamela, a 43-year-old psychotherapist, lives in Chelsea, Manhattan, with her 4-year-old son, Calder. She and Jacob Nolan are cousins with a 22-year age gap. Jacob was the godfather of her son. In 2012, Pamela offered to help Jacob by inviting him to move from Florida to her apartment. While living with her, she provided him with therapy sessions and prescribed medication. In exchange for her help, Jacob took responsibility for Calder's care. Jacob trusted her completely. In one photo, Jacob is seen lying in bed with Pamela, laughing, which shows he feels comfortable and at home with her. However, it's important to note that this relationship is not just familial. Pamela is also Jacob's psychotherapist. Jacob cared deeply for Calder and treated him like a son. He wanted to set a positive example for his godson of what a real man should be like. This approach seemed to work, as Jacob, who had struggled with mental illness for years, seemed to be stabilizing, joking frequently and always smiling. Unfortunately, this happiness did not last long. Over time, Pamela began to frequently express her frustrations with her ex-partner, Michael Weiss, Calder's father. Pamela ended her relationship with Michael shortly after the birth of her son. Michael Weiss, 38, is a psychotherapist. On the surface, he and Pamela appear to be a happy, loving couple. However, beneath the perfect exterior, their relationship is in trouble. Both Michael and Pamela have reported domestic violence to the police. Pamela once attacked Michael with a piece of broken glass. Michael received medical treatment, stitched up the wound, and later that day, he reported the incident to the police. As a result, Pamela was arrested and charged with assault. However, she was soon forgiven by Michael and the couple reconciled, but a few months later, Pamela went to the police again, claiming that Michael had threatened her and wanted to kill her. She later retracted that statement. Although they were never officially married, Michael and Pamela's relationship lasted about 4 years. After they had a son in 2008, Pamela finally ended the relationship. Their tumultuous relationship ended. But a new conflict arose. The custody battle for their son, Calder. Every day, Pamela tells Jacob about Michael in insulting words. She complained that Michael refused to pay child support and even accused him of doing bad things to their son, Calder, during his visits. On the morning of November 12, 2012, Jacob was awakened by Pamela's gentle touch. She climbed into his bed, caressed his back, and whispered sweet nothings in his ear. She told him that Jacob was her savior. He was the best person in the world because no one understood her like he did. However, her affectionate mood quickly changed. She took a black sports bag from her closet and stuffed it with a long-handled hammer and a kitchen knife. Overwhelmed with emotion, she began to cry and told Jacob that today was the day he needed to face Michael. A diagram showing the entrance to the multi-story office building where Michael is seeing patients is written on a piece of paper. Jacob stands up, grabs his bag, stuffs the diagram into his pocket, and leaves. Before leaving, he washes his face and declares, "Today is the day our lives will change for the better because Michael will be eliminated." Jacob arrived at the right high-rise in Manhattan. He circled the building, observing it from different angles. Entering through the service entrance, he checked in on the first floor, provided his real name, and mentioned he was going to the tutoring center. He was allowed inside. Jacob took the elevator to the 12th floor and made his way to Michael's office. He heard a patient inside and decided to wait in the hallway for the appointment to finish. Soon, the patient would exit, leaving Michael alone. While waiting, Jacob felt increasingly anxious. Doubts flooded his mind, making him question whether he was making the right decisions. At one point, he thought about abandoning everything and running home. However, the idea of returning to Pamela without completing her request and disappointing her was stronger than his fear. Jacob realized he had no choice but to continue. After the patient left, Jacob entered the office and informed Michael that Pamela had asked him to collect financial documents for the Calders' kindergarten. As Michael searched for the documents, Jacob asked to use the restroom. In the restroom, Jacob took out a knife and hid it in his pocket, then retrieved a large hammer. He exited the bathroom and approached Michael, swinging the hammer at him. Thankfully, Michael reacted quickly, ducking just in time to avoid a serious injury, though the hammer struck his shoulder. Jacob then pulled out the knife, and a struggle ensued. Michael, being physically larger, quickly fought back. The people around heard Michael's cry for help. They mistakenly thought that the doctor was being attacked by an unstable mental patient. They quickly called 911 to report the incident. Before the police arrived, Jacob and Michael, feeling exhausted, sat down in the hallway. Jacob took out his phone and took a selfie, which he sent to Pamela along with a question about what he should do next. But he never received a reply. The situation made him feel very strange. The police and ambulance arrived shortly after. The injured men were rushed to the hospital for treatment. Fortunately, none of them had life-threatening injuries. Michael was treated and sent home the same day. Jacob's injuries were more serious and the doctors noted that he was unstable. Jacob was arrested in the hospital while he was receiving treatment. He sent a detailed message to Pamela about what had happened to him and Michael. Although she initially ignored his message, she eventually asked which hospital he was in. When Pamela arrived, she was not allowed to see Jacob, who was already handcuffed to the bed. Jacob spent 4 days in the hospital before being taken to a jail cell after his discharge. He was released on bail of $200,000 while awaiting trial. Jacob was permitted to fly from New York to his parents' home in Florida. Several weeks after the incident, Michael filed a lawsuit against Pamela, accusing her of conspiring to kill him. Michael argued that Pamela was dangerous and insisted that their son should live with him. He presented surveillance footage from a hardware store showing that the day before the attack, Pamela and Jacob had purchased a hammer together, and Pamela had paid in cash. Pamela denied any involvement, saying that she had only asked Jacob to retrieve some financial documents from Michael, but had not asked Jacob to attack. Although she admitted to giving Jacob a knife, she explained that it was to protect her son Calder, since Calder's daycare was on the first floor of the building where Michael worked. Shortly thereafter, the judge transferred custody of Calder to Michael Weiss, granting him full custody and banning Pamela from contacting her son for 5 years. A few months after the incident, Jacob accused Pamela of orchestrating the attack on Michael. He claimed that Pamela meticulously planned the attack, and that she had instructed Jacob to approach Michael and hit him with a hammer. Jacob previously said that Pamela had been psychologically manipulating him. Pamela repeatedly told him that Michael was harming her son, but there was no evidence to support her claim. No one ever witnessed Michael harming Calder or saying anything negative to his son. In fact, relatives testified that Michael cared deeply for his son. Pamela was someone Jacob trusted completely and considered very close. Meanwhile, Jacob's parents were in despair. They fully supported their son and claimed that Pamela had brainwashed him using psychological techniques from her practice. In March 2016, Jacob Nolan's trial began. He claimed that Pamela had forced him to attack Michael Weiss. Prosecutors described Jacob as a spoiled child from a wealthy family, noting that he provided 3 inconsistent accounts of the event and appeared confused. When the police first arrived at Michael's office, Jacob pointed at Michael and accused him of attacking Jacob with a knife. However, during questioning, Jacob claimed that he had never used a hammer in Michael's office. He explained that he had brought the hammer for self-defense because he was afraid of Michael. In his third statement, Jacob said that Michael had attacked him first. Prosecutors presented a key piece of evidence regarding the motive behind the attack on Michael. Just before the attack, Michael had purchased a $1.5 million life insurance policy, naming his son Calder as the beneficiary. However, 3 days before the attack, on November 9, 2012, Michael had agreed to add Pamela as a co-beneficiary and allow her to manage Calder's money. Jacob claimed that this was the first time he had learned about the insurance policy and claimed that Pamela had never shared her financial affairs with him. During the trial, it was revealed that Jacob had purchased plastic zip ties from a hardware store in addition to the hammer found with Pamela. Jacob confirmed this and made a shocking admission. Pamela had asked him not only to kill Michael but also to ensure he suffered before dying. She described brutal acts that Jacob was supposed to carry out. Jacob refused to inflict such extreme cruelty. But he agreed to kill Michael. Jacob mentioned that Pamela initially wanted to create a homemade weapon using an air pistol, but when they got to the hardware store, they decided it would be easier and more effective to use a hammer instead. Jacob's attorney focused on proving that Jacob was insane. However, proving that he was insane is quite difficult. Currently, there is no test that can reveal a person's thoughts and feelings at the time of the crime. Evaluations are usually based on interviews, police reports, medical records, and sometimes social media messages. Often, 2 different psychiatrists can give conflicting opinions, which can confuse judges and juries. Although mental illness can affect emotions, thoughts, and behavior, throughout the trial, Jacob clearly understood his actions and admitted that they were wrong and bad. He did not appear insane in court. He was handsome, articulate, well-dressed, and answered questions clearly. Pamela was not called to testify at the trial by either the prosecution or the defense. Jacob Nolan, who had a mental disorder, faced skepticism regarding his claim that Pamela was the one who initiated the attack. Before the trial, Jacob's lawyers hired detectives to locate Pamela, but they were unable to find her, and her apartment was empty. In March 2016, after a 2-week trial, 24-year-old Jacob Nolan was convicted of attempted murder and second-degree assault, receiving a sentence of 9.5 years in prison. Jacob was very upset about his sentence, stating, "It's unfair. I'm not a danger to society." His parents regretted their decision to send him to live with their Pamela, believing it was their biggest mistake. On October 19, 2017, nearly 5 years after Michael's attack, police located Pamela in Sullivan, New York. The Manhattan District Attorney charged her with conspiracy to murder Michael Weiss. At the time of Pamela's arrest, police found her passport and Calder's birth certificate. Pamela was arrested and maintained her innocence. She hired 2 of New York's top attorneys, who claimed that the video showing her doing laundry and the video of her buying the hammer had been edited. They claimed that Pamela was a highly educated psychotherapist and would never have considered organizing a murder. In the 5 years after Jacob's attack, Pamela lived a normal life. She worked and rented an apartment. She did not attempt to go into hiding or flee the country, but she avoided reporters and did not comment on Jacob's crimes. Pamela was detained before her trial at the notorious Rikers Island prison in New York, where she spent 5 years due to legal issues. On September 7, 2022, during a pre-trial hearing, Pamela made a statement agreeing to plead guilty in return for a lighter sentence. However, a month later, she decided to withdraw her plea. Pamela's trial took place. The jury found Pamela Buchbinder guilty and she was sentenced to 11 years in prison. After the verdict was read, she looked sadly at her relative, who blew her kisses. Jacob and Pamela are currently serving their sentences in separate correctional facilities in New York. Jacob is scheduled to be released in 2024, while Pamela will be released in 2027. Jacob maintains regular phone contact with his parents. He has expressed remorse for his actions and reflects on them every night. He even wishes to meet Michael Weiss in person to apologize and seek forgiveness. When Pamela is released, her son, Calder, will be 19. He is currently being raised by his biological father, Michael, who still works in Manhattan.